Hey guys, Kiwi here. Welcome to my Breaking Bad Season 2 retrospective, where I'll be breaking down every episode of Season 2 and ranking them in a tier list. Warning of spoilers for Breaking Bad, and potentially some vague Better Call Saul spoilers as well. With that being said, let's first hear a word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Morgan & Morgan. When you're injured, you deserve compensation, and the size of your law firm matters. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They have over 100 offices across the country, more than 800 lawyers, and 4,000 case staff ready to fight for you. Morgan & Morgan has recovered over $13 billion for their clients. They fight hard to get full and fair compensation. When you hire Morgan & Morgan, you don't just get a lawyer assigned to your case. You get a dedicated legal team, case investigators, paralegals, and customer case specialists all focused on maximizing your settlement. This intense care is what gives your case the biggest chance of getting a larger settlement. The best part about working with Morgan & Morgan, you pay nothing upfront for their services. Everything is completely free of charge unless they win your case. No upfront costs and no sign-up fees. All paperwork, research, expert witnesses, negotiations, and court hearings, it's all free unless they win. If you don't win your case, you pay nothing. Morgan & Morgan has attorneys who focus on every area of personal injury law. Car accidents, slip and fall, workplace injuries, medical malpractice, nursing home abuse, and more. In 2020, there were over 5 million car crashes. That's more than 15,000 a day and 600 an hour. These numbers are shockingly high, which also most likely implies that you or someone you know may have suffered due to a recent car crash. People are often afraid to sue because they feel bad. When you sue for an injury, you're not suing the person who caused the injury, you're suing their insurance company who's sitting on billions of dollars. There's no reason to feel bad for getting the compensation you deserve. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/thevividkiwi or dial #law #529 on your cell phone. Morgan & Morgan will fight to get you the best results. Thank you so much to Morgan & Morgan for supporting the channel by sponsoring this video, and speaking of which, let's jump right into it. Season 2, Episode 1, 737. The Season 2 premiere starts with one of the most iconic and unpredictable flash-forward scenes, which is a recurring theme throughout the entire season right up until the finale, where we finally get answers for it, with the titles for each episode that features one of these black and white flash-forwards becoming a secret message when all put together reveals the truth of it all. Although I guarantee that most of you probably are already aware, this 737 down over Albuquerque Easter egg, it's iconic for a reason, and thus I feel obligated to at least mention it. I'm most likely going to keep the recap of these cold opens to a minimum until I discuss the outcome during the Season 2 finale, but I will state that these flash forwards are the perfect combination of suspense, mystery, hype, and calculated misdirection, which is what makes them so memorable. This first cold open teases Walt's backyard with an uneasy silence followed by sirens in the background. We then get our first reveal of the iconic teddy bear eyeball in the pool, followed by the pink teddy bear itself. As we see more of these black and white flash forwards throughout the season, we get more and more hints that something potentially tragic has happened to the White household, when in reality, there's much more to it than that. So back in the current timeline, Season 2 picks up right where Season 1 left off, or even shows the final moments of the Season 1 finale, as we pretty much have to rewatch the meeting between Walt, Jesse, and Tuco, where Tuco beats Nodos to a pulp.
Wow! Damn, man, look at that, look!
This works fine under its original intention when it first aired, which is the fact that the show is catching you up to speed after potentially not seeing the show in a year's time, but during future binge watches, it's definitely unnecessary in hindsight, considering it's just an exact copy of the final scene from Season 1 without anything really added. Now, while filming, in order to seamlessly recreate this Season 1 scene, the creators had to completely reposition the cars in the junkyard to look the exact same as they had done so previously during Season 1 to get the specific shots that they wanted. So Walt and Jesse go back to Jesse's car after watching Tuco violently beat one of his men. As they're clearly in shock of what they just witnessed, Walt instantly starts calculating how much money he needs to provide for his family after he's gone. What they just witnessed clearly would make them want to quit what they're doing, but Walt still wants to provide for his family, so he calculates how much he needs in order to do so, under the implication that as soon as that amount is met, he'll quit, with the idea that he just needs to hang in there the best he can until he gets his targeted amount.
$737,000, that's what I need. That is what I need.
I love the subtext that this scene brings to the table, as it becomes obvious what Walt is adding up, and why, especially after what they just saw. Walt comes to the conclusion that he needs $737,000 to leave for his family, which is where the name of the episode comes from, negating the whole 737 down over Albuquerque secret double meaning as well. This means that hypothetically all they need to do is 11 more drug deals in order to cash out for good, if they can even survive that long, with him reassuring Jesse that they'll do it in a public place like he initially suggested from now on. However, as they go to leave, Tuco drives back to them and drags No-Dos out of his vehicle as he's having a seizure. Tuco yells at Walt and Jesse to save his life, but it's too little too late, and Walt realizes this, holding Jesse back from having to do mouth-to-mouth.
Do something. He needs an ambulance. He needs a hospital. Do something. You're smart, right? Do that thing!
As Tuco orders Gonzo to hide No-Dos' body, Walt and Jesse try slowly backing away to leave, but Tuco, who's clearly trying to calm down and hide how affected he is over the fact that he just accidentally killed No-Dos, takes it out on Walt and Jesse by giving them a hard time for wanting to leave, even though he knows that Walt is correct in stating that their business is concluded. So due to seeing Tuco lash out at realizing No-Dos was dead by disrespectfully kicking his dead body, followed by intimidating Walt and Jesse, having a long-formed arrangement with Tuco now seems more unfeasible than it already did, with Walt and Jesse becoming worried that Tuco will irrationally one day kill them as well. We then cut to Skylar back at home, who notices the many pill bottles that Walt has. This relates directly back to the pillow scene from episode 105 when Walt said that he didn't want to be cramming tons of pills down his throat every day, which we then saw him doing in 106. This subtle connection of Skylar looking at the pills is a prime example of the high quality detail put into this show, as it's just a quick and brief moment without any dialogue that can easily be missed if not paid close attention to. This is why I'll always say that you can casually enjoy Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, but the more that you pay close attention, the more you will be rewarded as a viewer.
I don't want to choke down 30 or 40 pills every single day and lose my hair and lie around too tired to get up. Some dead man, some artificially alive, just marking time.
So Skylar hears Walt return home, but he ignores her when she calls out to him, causing her to go to the living room to see Walt, or Heisenberg rather, zoning out while flipping through TV channels. Walt's clearly traumatized by the whole No-Dos situation, and may be flipping through channels to see if there's any news reports about the body being discovered. Skylar breaks him out of his trance and gives him a hard time for ignoring her. Usually Walt's great at being able to turn on and off the Heisenberg persona switch, but here he struggles to revert back to his family man personality, causing Skylar to realize that something's wrong. This is also the first time that she ever sees him wearing the Heisenberg hat, which he just brushes off. We then get one of the most uncomfortable scenes of the whole show, as Walt attempts to force himself onto Skylar. Walt goes from crying on her shoulder to wanting to get frisky, which is a total out of the blue and inappropriate 180. As we know from season 1, Walt's sex drive amplifies whenever he does or just did something illegal, but here he may be doing it to also try to cope with what he just went through. Walt's trying to grasp onto any feeling of emotion that he can, but clearly he chose the wrong one, to the point that Skylar has to push him off of her after having her face bashed against the fridge. Walt goes to sit outside to reflect on his inability to control himself, and Skylar tries to level with him, while stating that he can't take things out on her. As Junior comes home, he notices the aftermath of what just happened in the kitchen, including some of Skylar's face masks still clearly on the fridge, which is just icing on the cake of uncomfortableness. Meanwhile, Jesse waits at the doghouse to buy a gun, as Tuco has him scared for his life. The song that plays during this is Any Way the Wind Blows by J.J. Cale, and to be honest it's not that memorable, so moving on. Walt goes over to Jesse's house where Jesse confronts him on this, stating that they have to kill Tuco before Tuco can kill them. Jesse admits that Tuco's been purposely trying to spook him by calling him multiple times just to hang up, along with cruising around his neighborhood.
Conjecture.
This is conjecture.
Yes, and conjecture isn't helping.
Oh, my conjecture isn't helping. Oh, okay, fine. Facts in. Fact A. My phone rang like 8 times last night. Dead air, hang-ups every time. Second fact, like 3 in the morning, I saw that black caddy that's cruising my neighborhood.
Although Walt tries downplaying the situation, stating that if Tuco wanted to kill them, he would have done so already when they were still at the junkyard, Jesse emphasizes how Tuco doesn't think rationally, and that right now he may be weighing whether or not he can trust them, and may consider them as loose ends who need to be snuffed out.
We are witnesses, we are loose ends. Right now, Tuco's thinking, yeah, hey, and I trust them. What happens when he decides no?
Jesse takes out his gun, giving Walt the ultimatum of either him or us. Walt initially argues against it, but opens up to the possibility, questioning Jesse on how he would do it. Since Walt is agreeing to the idea of premeditated murder, he wants to make sure that they have it planned down to a science, which Jesse clearly reveals that he doesn't. Walt focusing on every minute detail and variable is a huge show of his character. as it implies how precise and calculated he is about making such a risky decision. Although Walt has killed Crazy 8 and Emilio, he's never premeditated murder like this before, causing him to overanalyze the hypothetical to give himself peace of mind that it will work with them coming out still alive.
You know, giving it a snort, just pop, pop, pop!
Pop, pop, pop. So 3 shots.
Yeah, 3 shots, or I don't know, 2.
No, wait, is it 2 or is it 3?
I mean, 2 would probably work, I guess, yeah.
Okay, 2 shots. 2 shots in the chest, 2 shots in the face.
Man, come on.
No, I'm just trying to understand how this works.
I just absolutely love this scene and consider it extremely underrated. It not only emphasizes the characteristics of Walt and Jesse, but also the chemistry between the two characters being on opposite ends of the spectrum. While Jesse is frantic, Walt is calm and collected. After Jesse is unable to properly answer any of the hypotheticals, Jesse shows that he can't even open the gun, proving to Walt just how inexperienced and unqualified Jesse is to accomplish what he's proposing.
Now, at this point, how many shots have been fired? I mean, you've got to be running low, right? How many bullets does that gun even take?
Let me see.
How can you suggest that we kill a man and you can't even open the gun?
Meanwhile, we get another scene adding to the Marie klepto arc, which I guess I'll acknowledge as much as I want to skip over it. We see Marie leaving Skylar a voicemail, which implies that Marie does feel bad about the whole Tiara situation, although she's unable to admit it, instead just pretending that everything's okay in hopes that it'll just blow over. Hank notices this and confronts her over going to her therapist that's supposed to be helping her with her klepto problem. Marie passive-aggressively brushes Hank off and runs over a neighborhood kid's RV car as she drives away, causing Hank to have to pay the kid for it. The Marie klepto arc doesn't really go anywhere, causing it to widely become one of the least favorite plot points for fans, myself included, as it just feels like a waste of time in retrospect. Clearly the creators wanted to flesh out her character, so they incorporated it with the potential of elaborating on it further in future seasons, which kind of happens but never really comes to fruition or connects to the main story in any truly meaningful way. However, for what it's worth, it does flesh out Marie and her relationship with both Hank and Skylar about it, creating inner conflict between the family due to how Marie decides to go about denying it at first. We then catch up with Hank at work, giving us a hilarious Hank moment as he flicks away a criminal asking for a phone call.
Hey, where's my phone call? Ow!
It's a quick 2-second moment following the establishing shot to set up the scene of Hank at work, but it speaks volumes in regard to Hank's character. So Gomez updates Hank on the fact that there's security footage of Walt and Jesse stealing the barrel of chemicals used in their new method of cooking. Hank obviously doesn't know that they're Walt and Jesse, but he realizes that these criminals switched up their formula due to being short on pseudo, and acknowledges that they must know their chemistry considering the fact that their new formula is actually old school, along with the fact that they were able to steal the barrel by breaking into the building using thermite. This continues the cat and mouse chase of Hank constantly one step behind Walt and Jesse, along with emphasizing how Walt is right under Hank's nose without him even realizing it. It's crazy how much Hank is able to accurately deduce while still being completely oblivious that Walt is the person he's after. It's just so ironic seeing Hank and Gomi make fun of the barrel thieves for carrying the barrel instead of thinking of rolling it, unaware that Hank is actually making fun of Walt himself.
Hey, try rolling it, morons. It's a barrel. It rolls. Jesus.
Hank then accurately deduces that the two have book smarts but not street smarts, which is true. Although Jesse is supposed to be the street smarts to counteract Walt's book smarts, as we saw earlier in the episode, Jesse doesn't have as much street smarts as he would like to think, considering he can't even open a gun and has no idea how to plan to kill Tuco. Hank also essentially describes and sets up the already ongoing events of episodes 201 and 202, as he realizes that with a barrel of ingredients that big, these two will most likely alert the Juarez cartel, which Tuco is a part of. Hank states how they better hope that the DEA catches up to them before the cartel can, but as we'll soon see, the latter ends up happening. Speaking of which, as Walt gets home, he notices what he thinks is Tuco's vehicle down the street, making him paranoid that Tuco is now trying to spook him as well, just like how he was with Jesse. This causes Walt to stay up all night on the lookout for Tuco, with Walt now terrified for his family. However, the creators actually revealed that the vehicle that Walt sees is slightly different than Tuco's, and that this isn't actually Tuco staking out Walt's house, and just coincidentally some random person. So Skylar wakes up the following morning and she notices how Walt isn't in the bed beside her, and confronts him on not coming to bed the previous night. Walt gives some blatant excuse about not wanting to wake her due to nausea, but Skylar doesn't buy it. After Skylar leaves following her declining another phone call from Marie, Walt secretly puts back a kitchen knife that he was hiding to use as self-defense in case Tuco attacked his house, which is a great cinematic shot that gets referenced with an amazing payoff in the final season. But back to Jesse's house, Walt is now completely on board with Jesse wanting to take out Tuco due to now being as spooked as he is. Although Jesse never told Tuco or his crew where Walt lives, Walt accuses Jesse of having a big mouth, which may be a reference to season 1 when Walt got mad at Jesse for telling Crazy 8 everything about him. Walt realizes that if Tuco finds out how his brother-in-law is a DEA agent, he'll go completely ballistic, causing Jesse to bring out his gun explaining how he figured out how to open it.
I finally figured out how to... Look, I figured it out. I say we get a second gun, right? For you? Double our chances? I mean, mathematically...
I've got a better idea.
Thank God.
Jesse suggests that they should buy a second gun for Walt to double their chances, but becomes extremely relieved at Walt admitting that he has a better idea, which is castor beans. I love Jesse's initial reaction to this, clearly unaware of how the beans are actually poison. Not only does Jesse work as a great comic relief character from time to time, but he also acts confused in the same way that the audience might be, which causes Walt to give natural exposition to explain his plan. This is a recurring theme throughout the show whenever Walt uses his chemistry and overall book smarts to get them out of whatever situation they find themselves in, and I think this dynamic works quite well, and clearly do a lot of other people considering how popular this show is.
What are we gonna do with them? Are we just gonna grow a magic beanstalk? Huh? Climb it and escape?
Process them into ricin.
Rice and beans.
Now, Walt explains how he knows about ricin due to the assassination of a Bulgarian journalist in the 70s, again pulling from Walt's knowledge of history, just like the Gustav gun in season 1 with the thermite. Meanwhile, Skylar gets interrupted, reminiscing over an old photo of her and Ted, which is actually the first time we ever see Ted, but she gets interrupted with Hank arriving to talk about Marie. I love how Hank goes to sit down, but stands right back up when Skylar can tell that this is about Marie. Again, although I don't care for the Marie Klepto arc, this is actually one of my favorite Skylar scenes in the whole show, as she breaks down to Hank over how although she's the one who truly needs support, Marie always finds a way to be the center of attention. So Hank admits that he already knew that Marie was a shoplifter, which explains why he wanted to go outside to get some fresh air with Walt during Skylar's baby shower in the season 1 finale when she opened up Marie's tiara present, as Hank felt guilty. Now, from Skylar's reaction to realizing that Hank already knew, to her disbelief that Marie's therapist is actually helping her like Hank says, it all conglomerates into Skylar losing it once Hank states that they have to support Marie. Although many viewers who like and support Walt like to give Skylar crap for being unlikable, you gotta admit she makes some great points in this scene, summarizing everything going on in her life that we should be sympathetic towards.
The almost 40-year-old pregnant woman with a surprise baby on the way, and the husband with lung cancer who disappears for hours on end and I don't know where he goes and he barely even speaks to me anymore, with the moody son who does the same thing. But oh, I see. Now I'm supposed to go, Hank. Please, what can I possibly do to further benefit my spoiled, kleptomaniac bitch sister who somehow always manages to be the center of attention?
Hank's awkwardly supportive hug at the end perfectly ties a bow on this entire scene and portrays how he must feel putting himself in the middle of these two sisters, as he just wanted to help but was oblivious to how Skylar truly felt up until now. But back to Walt and Jesse. We get a ricin making montage to the song They're Gonna Take My Thumbs by Holy F***. At first, I honestly thought that this was just part of the original score by Dave Porter, but upon looking it up, it's actually its own song. This is what I mean by how the show chooses seemingly obscure songs for its soundtrack that just fit so well. Now, with the soundtrack in mind, I figured that now is as good of a time as any to take a moment to give some honorable mentions to the songs from Season 1 that I neglected to mention in my tier list for Season 1. And apologies in advance if I get the names of any of these songs or artists wrong, it's bound to happen. So first up is Dead Fingers Talking by Working for a Nuclear-Free City, which plays during Walt and Jesse's first cookout in the desert during episode 101. Also from episode 101 is Out of Time Man by Mick Harvey, which plays as the episode ends with Walt and Skylar getting frisky. Next up is Didn't I by Darondo, which plays at the end of 104 when Walt blows up Ken Wynn's car. Then there's by Fujiya and Miyagi, which plays during Jesse's first cook with Badger in 105. Then there's Scooby-Doo Love by choir and orchestra Charlie Steinman, which plays during Jesse's dealer montage from 106. There's also Catch Your Own Train by the Silver Seas, which is from the end of 106 after Walt blows up Tuco's HQ. Then finally, there's Who's Gonna Save My Soul by Gnarls Barkley, which plays at the end of the Season 1 finale, episode 107, during the same ending scene that the Season 2 premiere picks up on. For the most part, I'm only going to include in-depth analysis of certain songs that really stick out to me personally, such as DLZ later on in this season, but I'll be sure to give honorable mentions to most of the soundtrack from now on, even if it's just a brief mention, simply due to how fitting they all are for the show. Anyways, back to the episode. As Walt and Jesse brainstorm on how to trick Tuco into taking the ricin, Walt gets a phone call from Hank, and the show gives us a subtle detail about Walt now having 2 cell phones due to checking the wrong phone first. I just love the initial misdirect that this scene provides, from Walt thinking that his family is in danger due to Hank's initial question of desperately asking Walt if he's been home yet, but also the viewers as well, since we see Hank at some sort of crime scene before realizing the context. Hank's phone call is a roller coaster of emotions for Walt. It starts out with him worried that Hank is calling him about something happening to his family, followed by Walt's relief when Hank is only calling about Skylar and Marie's current feud. This, however, turns into sheer panic when Hank sends Walt an image of Gonzo now dead alongside No-Doz, unaware that Walt and Jesse have anything to do with them, causing both Walt and Jesse to freak out, thinking that Tuco killed Gonzo and will come for them next, especially after Hank states how they must have pissed off the wrong guy. Walt frantically takes Jesse's gun and leaves in a rush to get home in fear of Tuco going after his family. Although Walt does quickly give a reason for why he needs Jesse's gun more than Jesse does, it's still selfish of Walt to do so. Walt figures that since Jesse lives alone, he can just skip town, whereas Walt needs to stay put due to not being able to just uproot his life and skip town himself due to having a family. Even with that in mind, this shows that when it comes down to it, Walt always puts himself and his own family first, regardless of what kind of danger Jesse may also be in. Now, as the show goes on, Walt does begin to care more and more about Jesse, which we'll be discussing near the end of Season 2, but this scene still does a great job at showing how Jesse's safety isn't as important to Walt as his own. Walt returns home and starts carefully clearing his house with the gun, thinking that something may have happened since it's completely silent and dark. This, however, turns out to be another misdirect, as Skylar is revealed to be taking a bath alone because Junior's at his friend's house. Skylar's clearly passive-aggressive towards Walt's absence, and then she becomes more agitated due to Walt leaving her in the tub in order to go grab all of his money and put it in a diaper box with Jesse's gun. Walt becomes distracted by Skylar calling out to him, causing him to leave the box out in the open instead of hiding it more discreetly. Meanwhile, Hank continues to inspect the crime scene of Gonzo and No-Doz, and realizes that Gonzo died while trying to move No-Doz's body. Apparently, Gonzo felt so bad for No-Doz that he returned to his body later on by himself to move it with the intention of giving him a proper burial, but in the process of doing so, Gonzo got pinched by the stack of cars. The beginning of the episode foreshadowed this brilliantly by first having Gonzo speak out against Tuco for just wanting him to abandon the body, followed by the car stack shifting when Gonzo first hid No-Doz under it. So now the viewers know that Tuco didn't actually kill Gonzo and that Gonzo's death was a freak accident. However, even though Tuco didn't kill Gonzo, the end of the episode reveals that Tuco is in fact still after Jesse and Walt, as Gonzo's disappearance has spooked Tuco. Well, let's put a pin in that for a second, as we first have to go back to Walt and Skylar, as Walt tries speaking to her, most likely contemplating what excuse he's gonna use this time, but gets interrupted by first a phone call on his second cell phone, followed by noticing headlights through one of the windows. Walt mysteriously walks out of the bathroom without saying another word to Skylar, and from her perspective, he just vanishes. This is because he realizes that Jesse is in his car outside of his house, so he goes to scold Jesse over why he's there, just for Tuco to pop up in the back seat, revealing that he has Jesse at gunpoint and has kidnapped him to lead him to Walt's house to kidnap him too. The episode ends with Walt getting in the car, followed by them driving away. Now, just to rewind a bit, how did this all go down from Jesse's perspective? After Walt left Jesse's house, we saw Jesse frantically grab his duffel bag of money in order to prepare to flee, but I guess that Tuco got to him before he could leave in his car. I suppose it's neither here nor there, it's just kind of arguing semantics, but it is something that got me thinking. Tuco wasn't there to confront them as Walt left, so is Tuco already hiding in Jesse's car at this point, or did Tuco confront Jesse right after Walt had left? I don't know, I guess it doesn't really matter. Regardless, this episode gets a strong A tier. It's a great season premiere that perfectly flows the Season 1 finale right into the first Season 2 story arc, which is the conclusion and climax of Tuco's character. Also, since we didn't get an answer to the mysterious black and white cold open, it implies to viewers that this will be a season-long mystery instead. This episode also had many memorable character moments, from the multiple scenes of Walt and Jesse at Jesse's place to even Skylar venting to Hank. Nothing absolutely crazy happens this episode, but that's because it's perfectly setting up the next episode, which is absolutely wild, so let's get into it. Season 2, Episode 2, Grilled. This episode also starts with a flash forward, but not a black and white one, as it's instead a flash forward that is to the end of the same episode. We see Jesse's car out in the desert with the hydraulics bouncing as it's filled with bullet holes with an unknown body laying on the ground next to it. This is quite an ominous and mysterious cold open, perfectly hyping up what's about to happen next, showing how good Breaking Bad can be at hyping you up with its opening teasers. After the intro sequence, Hank recaps Tuco to his coworkers, such as the fact that he has cartel connections, along with a few other missable details, such as how he killed someone named Dog Paulson in '98, along with him knifing a guy in 2003. I discussed this more in my Tuco retrospective, but these are just a few examples of many throwaway lines from Breaking Bad that the creators elaborated on during Better Call Saul, and I'll acknowledge more of them as we get to them. Anyways, Hank hilariously hypes up the DEA to catch Tuco, but admits to Gomi that they'll never catch him once they leave the room. This is possibly my favorite funny Hank moment, as Hank tells Gomi that it's all about appearances, which is actually a huge character trait of Hank throughout this season, as we'll soon see him struggle to keep up his own appearances after what he's about to go through.
Do you want to find this guy?
Yes!
Are we going to find this guy?
Yeah! Louder, damn it!
Yeah!
Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah!
I ain't gonna find him. Guy's in Mexico by now. Appearances, Gomi. It's all about appearances.
Hank informs Gomi that he needs to take some personal time in the middle of this manhunt due to the fact that Walt is missing, so Hank goes over to the White residence to help and support Skylar and Junior. Hank arrives at the White residence and checks Walt's car before going inside, where Detective Tim Roberts is interviewing Skylar about Walt's disappearance. Even after everything that's been going on between Skylar and Walt, you can see how much she still worries for him due to how much she's already done to try and find any trace of him. I love the detail of how after giving Tim all of the info that she can, she passive-aggressively jabs at him for being the one who should be helping her find Walt, not the other way around.
I checked with every hospital within 50 miles, every police station, every morgue. So no, I don't have anything else. I was actually hoping that you had something else, being that you're the expert.
Skylar does quickly apologize, as she knows that she needs to first help them if they're gonna help her, and that she kinda acted out of line. Now as Hank and Tim leave, Hank admits to Tim that he ran a check on the supposed phone call that Skylar saw Walt receive shortly before going missing, which implies to them that Walt has a second cell phone, as there's no trace of that phone call happening. Skylar and Marie go around town putting up missing posters of Walt, with this montage accompanied by the song Red Moon by the Walkmen. After comforting Skylar, Marie brings up the whole tiara fiasco between them, but is shut down by Skylar telling her that now's not the time. I feel like the creators just included this line to show how they didn't forget about it, and that although Marie is helping Skylar, it's not like everything's now magically okay between them. As Junior prints out more missing posters, he's completely unaware that one of the baby diaper boxes right beside him actually has a ton of dirty money and a gun inside, with the camera focusing in on that fact as the scene ends. Marie and Hank later visit Skylar and Junior at their house, with Marie bringing up Walt having a potential second cell phone as a lead. Hank clearly didn't want to mention it to Skylar, as Walt having a second cell phone implies that he's keeping a huge secret from her, but Marie avoids that as it's definitely worth looking into. And as an aside, since Betsy Brando was actually pregnant during the filming of season 2, they had to hide her baby bump in every scene that she's in. Due to this, I can't help but notice all the tactics that the creators used to do so, such as having Marie hold a pillow on her lap during this scene. So Marie comes up with the theory that Walt's still getting high and that he may owe Jesse money. Although Hank doesn't think that's the case, Marie pushes him to investigate the possibility anyways, resulting in Hank going to question Jesse's mother. She's initially forthcoming, stating how Walt was one of the only teachers who ever cared about Jesse, which is an interesting statement to make considering how harsh Walt is on his students, with us even seeing the way that he coldly graded one of Jesse's tests back in season 1 when Jesse was at his parents' place going through his old stuff. I suppose Walt's teaching practices are the definition of tough love, something that Jesse never realized. Jesse's mother becomes hesitant when she realizes that Hank is with the DEA, causing her to think that Hank is tricking her, which makes her want to lawyer up. Hank admits that this interaction is off the books and that it's just a personal matter for him. Even so, she admits that she hasn't seen Jesse in a while and doesn't expect to anytime soon. Hank then brings up Jesse's vehicle, with her mentioning its hydraulics, again referencing the cold open flash forward. I'll put a pin in that because that's actually how he ends up tracking them down by the end of the episode, but we'll get there. Meanwhile, Tuco breaks and throws away Walt and Jesse's phones while revealing that he has them in Jesse's trunk. As the scene reveals that Jesse's car is in the exact spot as the cold open, tensions rise as the show continues to create worry for Walt and Jesse as the pieces start getting put together. Now as Tuco opens the trunk, Walt actually gets a vision of Skylar saying, "I understand," before Tuco pulls them out.
I understand.
Walt is clearly envisioning a dream scenario where Skylar accepts him for the criminal that he is, even though that wish is completely unrealistic. Jesse, however, tries attacking Tuco, which is shown to be unsuccessful, followed by Jesse taunting Tuco to shoot him in the back of the trunk, mocking Tuco for being the one who will have to clean it up. Jesse's clearly so worked up from the situation that he doesn't think about how this is actually his vehicle, which Tuco calls him out for. So Tuco brings them inside to the desert shack, where we get our very first introduction to Uncle Tio, aka Hector Salamanca. And yes, I know Tio means uncle, so I just said uncle, but Uncle Tio just kinda rolls off the tongue, I don't know. It's interesting how the creators originally just wanted Tio to be a bit part, and were originally gonna have a random extra play him. I'm glad that the great Mark Mongolis got this role, as he elevated Tio's character to become much more than originally intended. So Tuco brings Walt and Jesse a jug of water, and Walt selfishly reaches for it first, once again showing how he always puts himself first before Jesse. Now as they empty their pockets for Tuco, he notices a photo of Walt's family in his wallet, saying how dealing with a family man is fun due to lots of collateral damage, which may imply that this is the first time that Tuco is actually learning about Walt's family, which plays into the fact that it wasn't actually Tuco staking out Walt's house in the last episode. Tuco then grabs Walt and asks him the question of if he can trust him, referencing what Jesse was paranoid about in the last episode. Walt gives an incredibly cold stare while stating yes, and Tuco actually believes him, showing how Walt passed Tuco's lie detector test, which again I got more into during my Tuco retrospective.
Answer me one thing. Can I trust you?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Sit down.
Tuco then admits that the DEA raided his HQ that morning, and that since Gonzo's missing, Tuco thinks that the two are connected. Well, technically they are, but not in the way that he thinks. This is why Tuco gave Walt his lie detector test, as he was clearly paranoid that Jesse and or Walt could have been working with the DEA as well. Thank God Tuco never found out that Walt's brother-in-law was Hank, like Walt was worried about in the last episode, because if he did, that would have perfectly framed Walt for being an informant even though he's innocent, resulting in the same misunderstanding as in episode 101 with Crazy 8 and Emilio. Although Gonzo and the DEA technically are connected, as I said, it's not at all in the way that Tuco thinks. Tuco thinks that Gonzo is a CI for the DEA and that Gonzo ratted him out, causing the DEA to go after Tuco. In reality, Gonzo of course died while trying to move Nodo's body, and when the DEA discovered the bodies, they found Tuco's bloody fingerprint, which is what actually caused the DEA to zone in on him and raid his HQ. So Tuco accuses Gonzo being an informant due to Gonzo being upset about Nodo's, which causes Tuco to deflect any blame or guilt over Nodo's death. Tuco explaining that he has a gift to see the future says a lot in regard to the way his head works. This is both nerve-wracking and telling, as it makes Tuco seem somewhat deranged, while also being full of himself, as he clearly thinks that he's more smart than he actually is. As Tuco lashes out over Gonzo, repeatedly stabbing his table, the camera focuses on Walt and Jesse's reaction to the sheer violence brewing inside of Tuco, which is a clear reference to Walt and Jesse's reaction when Tuco first beat up Nodo's in the season 1 finale / season 2 premiere. Again, repeating myself from the Tuco retrospective, I love how many layers there are to the whole Gonzo death. There's what Walt and Jesse thinks, what Tuco thinks, and then there's the truth. Walt and Jesse thought that Tuco killed Gonzo, Tuco thought that Gonzo snitched, when in reality, Gonzo's death was just a tragic accident. As Tuco reveals that he thinks that Gonzo snitched, Walt and Jesse realize that Tuco in fact did not kill Gonzo, as Tuco clearly thinks that Gonzo is still alive. Jesse tries to not so subtly clarify this, with Walt cleverly rewording the question in such a way to avoid implying that they know that Gonzo's already dead. Tuco reaches for drugs to cope with the situation, but when he smells the ricin-laced dime baggie, he recoils, confronting them on what it exactly is. Jesse states how it's a killer, which is obviously an on-the-nose literal double meaning. Tuco then says how he wants Walt to come to Mexico with him to become a cartel cook, and although he sees value in Walt, he doesn't see any value in Jesse. But in order for Jesse to prove to Tuco that he needs him alive, Jesse tries selling the ricin-laced drugs as a new batch of product that they've been working on, just like Walt had originally planned. However, after convincing Tuco to try it, Jesse sells it a little too much, stating how there's a secret ingredient to it. This causes Tuco to pause before taking it, along with throwing it away after Jesse tries covering up his slip-up by stating how there's chili powder in it. This is a great reference back to episode 101, as Walt even told Jesse back then that
shit you cook is shit. No baby formula, no chili powder.
No, chili pea's my signature.
Not anymore.
He's got a secret ingredient. Chili powder. I hate chili powder.
Chili powder. Did I not already tell you how moronic that was?
As soon as Jesse said that to Tuco, Walt could tell that he just ruined the opportunity to get Tuco to take the ricin. So Tuco instead takes a hit of the blue sky, causing him to get hyped up and wanting to go take Jesse out as he sees no use for him after Jesse failed to convince him to try his cook. Walt stands between them, saving Jesse's life by stating how he needs him as his partner. This is the first of many times that Walt vouches for Jesse like this, showing how although Walt is selfish, he still does care about Jesse after everything that they've been through, at least to the point that he doesn't want him killed. Tuco tells Walt that his cousins are driving up from Mexico to smuggle them across the border, which is a line that gets elaborated on in both future seasons of Breaking Bad, along with even Better Call Saul as well. And I like how early the cousins are referenced here, considering we don't even really see them until season 3. So while Tuco cooks them all up some food, Walt and Jesse ponder over how to get Tuco to take the ricin. Walt gives Jesse a hard time for mentioning chili powder, but Jesse bites back by giving Walt a hard time for leaving his gun behind. During their bickering whispers, they realize that there's a news report on TV about how both No-Dos and Gonzo are dead. Walt quickly changes the channel before Tuco can see, since Tuco would blame them for being DEA informants if he found out that Gonzo was dead. Although Walt changes the channel before Tuco sees, he worries that Tio saw and will tell on them to Tuco about it. Walt checks to see if Tio is at all coherent, but Tio doesn't react to Walt trying to alert him by waving his hand in front of his face or snapping his fingers, so Walt figures that they're safe for now. So as Walt and Jesse struggle trying to figure out how to handle Tuco, Walt gives Jesse a hard time for proposing that they crack him over the head with something, as the only thing within Walt's reach is a fly swatter.
Let's just bum rush him. You crack him over the head with something, and I'll go for his gun.
Crack him over the head with something.
Although Tuco could be considered a fly that they need to swat, they're gonna need a much larger metaphorical swatter to do so. Jesse brings up how since Walt has cancer, he should be fearless as he's gonna die soon anyways. This understandably offends Walt, who gets mad at Jesse for implying that since he has cancer, his life isn't as important and in turn means less. When Walt calls him out for this, Jesse doubles down, completely oblivious as to how rude that implication truly is. With the burritos now made, Tuco gets Walt and Jesse to eat, but Walt laces Tuco's burrito with the ricin as Tuco gets Tio. Although Tuco's head is still turned when Walt does this, Tio witnesses Walt lacing Tuco's food as his wheelchair is already turned around. This causes Tio to ding his bell before Tuco eats, scaring Walt and Jesse as they realize that Tio's mind is sharper than they originally thought and that he's onto them. From getting Tuco to switch his burrito with Tio's to Tio pushing the laced burrito on the ground, Tio does everything he can to save Tuco's life, even though Tuco's completely oblivious to the fact, instead getting mad at Tio for wasting the food. Since Tio can barely move his body, the fact that he pushes himself forward to be able to push the laced burrito onto the ground says a lot. Plus, although Tuco is initially oblivious, Tio tries pointing at Walt as the reason why he pushed the burrito off the table, confirming to Walt that Tio knows that Walt tried to poison Tuco, along with the fact that Tio knows that Gonzo is dead. Now, just as a side note, I wonder what would have hypothetically happened if Walt and Jesse were somehow successfully able to get Tuco to have the ricin, because I'm pretty sure that Walt said that it'd take a day or two for it to kick in.
Anyway, within the next 48 hours, maybe 72, it'll look like natural causes.
So would they have had to go down to Mexico with Tuco, and then Tuco would have died then, and then they'd have to find out a way to escape Mexico? And this is of course under the implication that Tio would have never alerted Tuco of Walt and Jesse's nefarious acts. So maybe this would have happened if he didn't see Walt try to lace Tuco's burrito, or even if he didn't see the news report at all. But speaking of Tio alerting Tuco, so as Tuco uses some cows as target practice, Tio rings his bell to alert Tuco of Walt's betrayals, and apparently Tio is actually using his bell to say SOS in Morse code. Now I haven't confirmed this, feel free to confirm it yourself, but if true, that is pretty interesting. The only thing that makes that kind of far-fetched is the fact that Tio thought that Tuco would actually recognize the SOS as Morse code if that's actually what he was doing. So Tuco realizes that Tio is mean-mugging Walt and Jesse, which begins the nerve-wracking scene of Tio trying to communicate to Tuco that they're not to be trusted, while Walt and Jesse try deflecting any accusations. I love this dynamic of Tio on one side, Walt and Jesse on the other, and Tuco in the middle. Of course, if Tio could talk, this would be over very quick, but since all he can do is give a yes or no answer with his bell, it gives Walt and Jesse enough leeway to try and fool Tuco, as Tuco isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer.
I can see the future, you know? It's this gift that I have deep inside my head.
Coming across as a completely irrational and over-emotional violent menace. This back and forth goes on for a while as Walt and Jesse try excusing Tio for disliking them due to them changing the TV channel on him, when in reality, it's not the fact that they changed the channel, but it's what they changed the channel from. This episode does a great job making Tio and his bell extremely terrifying, as the lives of Walt and Jesse are determined by whether or not Tio rings his bell. The shot of Walt fearful in the background as he waits to see whether Tio rings his bell or not is a great example of this. I just love that shot. So after Tio acknowledges to Tuco that Walt and Jesse have been playing him like a fool, he grabs Jesse and pushes him outside with Walt following. Not so fun fact, during the filming of this episode, Aaron Paul actually had to go to the hospital due to getting a concussion after throwing himself through the door due to hitting his head so hard that he broke the door off its hinges, which was a real screen door and not some flimsy prop door. In the Insider podcast for this episode, Vince Gilligan stated that Aaron Paul threw himself through the door as the scene was shot from the outside so the camera wouldn't see that Raymond Cruz didn't actually push him. However, many fans jokingly blame Raymond for giving Aaron the concussion, which may be a misunderstanding due to the fact that after Aaron threw himself through the door, he pleaded for them to stop filming, which Raymond initially interpreted as acting, so he continued beating up Aaron momentarily before realizing that he was being serious and was actually injured. Anyways, back to the actual scene. Tuco holds Jesse at gunpoint while demanding that Walt tells him what he did, and seeing Jesse on his knees pleading for his life is such an absolutely brutal and crushing thing to see, and Aaron Paul definitely killed it with this scene. This leaves Walt with no more excuses, no more options, so he's forced to tell Tuco the truth in regard to poisoning him, along with what he thinks of him as a whole.
We tried to poison you because you're an insane, degenerate piece of filth, and you deserve to die.
This gives Jesse enough time to grab a rock off of the ground and hit Tuco with it, causing Tuco and Jesse to get in a scuffle while Walt lunges for the machine gun. Since Walt has never shot a gun before, let alone one so big, he's hesitant to take the shot due to being worried that he'd shoot Jesse too. Due to this, Jesse has to save his own life by grabbing Tuco's gun out of the back of his waistband, shooting Tuco in the gut with it. Instead of finishing him off, Walt tells Jesse to let him bleed, with them instead fleeing to Jesse's vehicle. However, once inside, they realize that Tuco still has the keys, but in reality it doesn't matter regardless due to the fact that Hank is driving up the road. So that's almost a blessing in disguise for them, because if they were able to turn Jesse's car on and drive away, Hank would have stopped them down the road and then he would have seen Walt with Jesse. And also, if he would have went up the road and saw Tuco afterwards, he would have connected the dots that they were involved with Tuco. Walt and Jesse think that Hank is Tuco's cousins, so they dart out of the car and flee into the desert. As they leave the car, we get a shot of the hydraulic controls paralleling the cold open, implying that we're about to witness the gunfight that the cold open will imply. As Tuco manages to limp his way to Jesse's car, the camera reveals that the vehicle arriving is not driven by his cousins, but instead actually Hank arriving at the scene. I love how the seemingly bland side plot of Walt's family trying to find him perfectly sets up and explains how Hank could arrive at the climax of the episode, resulting in the very shootout that the cold open foreshadowed. It's just such a perfect subversion of expectations that puts Hank's life in danger as he surprisingly finds Tuco at Jesse's car, as everything is connected. Near the beginning of the episode, Hank brought Tuco to the DEA's attention, but believed that they'd never find him in their manhunt. However, after dealing with personal family matters seemingly unrelated, Hank's now wound up finding Tuco after all when he wasn't even looking for him in the first place. So Tuco and Hank break out into a gunfight, with Tuco reaching for his machine gun being the cause of the hydraulics starting due to the harness of the gun getting caught on the controls. With them both emptying their clips, Hank manages to reload faster.
When he paused to reload, I was able to take an effective shot.
I love how during the gunfight with the car bouncing, you realize that one of them is going to die, with this being the first time that we've ever truly seen Hank's life in danger. It's just such a great subversion how the cold open made you worry for Walt and Jesse's lives when in reality, it's Hank we should have been worried about all along when we had no way of knowing that. As Hank approaches Tuco's body, Walt finally recognizes him, causing him to freak out and blindly flee before he's seen. The episode ends with Hank standing over Tuco's body as the hydraulics stop, and we hear Tio's bell dinging. I love how the hydraulics of the car represent a heart beating fast with adrenaline, then dies down as the firefight's now over with Tuco dead. It could represent Tuco's heart, not beating anymore, but also the adrenaline leaving Hank's body now that the firefight is over. Now before we get into the rankings, I gotta acknowledge how this show and Better Call Saul brilliantly bleed audio from the end of certain episodes into the credits, as I'm just an absolute sucker for this. As if the ending wasn't crazy enough, as the audio of the final moments bleed into the credits, it creates this jaw-dropping feeling as you ponder what you just saw and what's to come. Whether the audio is a sound like Hector's bell, or music, or even sometimes complete silence, I get shivers down my spine whenever I watch this effect take place. In this instance, episode 202 ends with Tio's bell ringing, and as the credits start playing, the ding warps into something seemingly sinister, causing a sense of dread of what's to come. It's almost a shame that while streaming this show, Netflix automatically starts playing the next episode instead of allowing you to soak in what you just saw, along with dwell on the sinister credits scene and what it may imply. Out of all the Breaking Bad credits, which change frequently from episode to episode in regard to the audio or the song playing, this has to be one of my absolute favorites. This should come as no surprise, but this episode gets an S tier. This is one of the best episodes of the show up to this point, hands down. Tuco is an incredibly iconic antagonist of the show, which makes it wild to think how he only appears in 4 episodes. As you may know, the creators intended on Tuco being the main antagonist throughout the entirety of season 2, but Raymond Cruz, Tuco's actor, requested to be killed off early due to scheduling difficulties from currently filming a different show at the same time. This episode's a complete banger and will go down as one of my favorite episodes of the show, still holding a special place in my heart even though there's so much more to come. Also, in case you're wondering how Hank knew where to find Jesse's car, it was through the LoJack GPS anti-theft system built into the hydraulics, which is what Hank was calling about as he left the house of Jesse's mother, as he used that to track down Jesse's car, which led him straight to Tuco. Season 2 Episode 3, Bit by a Dead Bee. This episode essentially covers the aftermath of the last episode, with Walt needing to come up with an elaborate excuse as to why he went missing, along with Jesse needing to clear his name for why his vehicle was at the shack with Tuco. Also, as a fun fact, the creators came up with episode titles for Breaking Bad from classic movies, with this episode's title being a reference to the movie To Have and Have Not. The episode implies getting potential harm from a person even after they've died, which in the context of the show pretty much implies that this is an aftermath episode of Walt and Jesse dealing with the ramifications of the whole Tuco arc. So the episode starts with Walt and Jesse burying Tuco's gun out in the desert, and I love it whenever the show films certain shots from seemingly through the ground of what's going on. We saw it in 102 when Jesse tries dissolving Emilio in his bathtub, then in 103 when Walt is cleaning up the mess, and we see it again here when they're burying Tuco's gun. So Walt comes up with a plan to handle their situation, and so they hitchhike but get picked up separately and go off to do so. This is of course when Walt pretends to have had a fugue state and sells the idea by undressing completely in a supermarket. You can tell that he's dreading having to go through with it simply by the expression on his face right when he's discovered. Side note, funny Easter egg, but when Walt gets discovered by the grocery store, isn't that a pink teddy bear right on the end of the aisle there? We see the pink teddy bear pop up various times throughout this season, not just during the black and white cold open, but during the episodes as well, which just continues to elaborate on the uneasy feeling that the black and white cold opens create whenever you notice one. Also, another fun fact about the intro to the episode is that the creators initially intended on having a full scene of Walt and Jesse out in the desert planning what to do next as they debate how much Hank and Walt's family knows. The creators, however, completely cut all the dialogue of Walt and Jesse debating their plans over the simple fact that they didn't know how much Hank knew, or what Skylar knew. Plus, the creators enjoyed the idea of the cold open simply showing scenes of them walking through the desert without any dialogue to tell a story itself. It was actually very difficult for the creators to figure out how Walt was going to come up with such an excuse to explain away his disappearance, and they eventually landed on the idea that if Walt acts crazy enough in regard to having some sort of amnesia, Skylar would simply have to believe it. So as Skylar and Junior go to visit Walt in the hospital, we get exposition of his fugue state, which includes the fact that he doesn't have permanent amnesia as he only doesn't remember what happened the previous few days, even allowing Walt to pretend to not remember when he came home when Skylar was in the bathtub. This fugue state excuse seems to work like a charm. That is until Walt realizes that he won't be able to leave the hospital until the doctors get to the bottom of it. He tries to blame all of his prescription pills, again another callback to them, but even though Skylar agrees with the idea, trying to grasp at any explanation she can, the doctors don't buy it. Also, Junior informed Walt of how Hank was in a shootout, and Walt does an impeccable job of pretending to not already know everything about it as he was there. So Marie and Skylar talk over the phone about separate situations that their respective husbands are going through, with Hank now being interviewed about the events of the shootout. Marie calls Hank indestructible, but as we'll soon see, he is quite the opposite and is just as human as everyone else. This brings us to the second part of Walt's cover-up plan, which includes Jesse becoming free of suspicion from the police. Since his car was at the crime scene, the cops are looking for him. So he stakes out his house with Badger until the cops leave so he can move his lab from his basement into the RV and then have it towed away to safety. Badger manages to get his cousin to tow the RV away, and my god, I hate this character. It's nothing against the actor or the writing for that matter, and is actually the complete opposite. The combination of both the great performance from the actor along with the way that the character is written just makes me completely despise him whenever I see him on screen, which was purposeful. This is why whenever I hate a character in a TV show, I almost have to give the actor praise for acting so dislikable along with, you know, the creators writing the character that way. Whenever you hate a character in a TV show, it's important to separate the character from the actor, and a lot of people don't know how to do that. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. So since Jesse left his duffel bag of cash in his vehicle when Tuco kidnapped him, he only has half the payment for Badger's cousin, but Badger vouches that Jesse will pay the rest later. Afterwards, Badger brags to Jesse about how he got him covered since he vouched for him, but as we know through Skinny Pete and Tuco, Jesse's friends vouching usually don't seem to go as well as initially expected.
Front, dude, Tuco's good for it. I don't need your punk ass to vouch for me!
Anyways, Jesse continues to include Badger in the cover-up plan, which includes Badger purposely snitching on Jesse's location so the DEA can detain him for questioning. So Jesse gets picked up at the Crossroad Motel with Wendy, but neither of them talk, with Jesse claiming his car was stolen and Wendy just wants her iconic root beer.
What you got from your pal Tuco?
Taco? I don't know any taco, and I damn sure didn't say anything about no crystal.
Where's my root beer? Come on.
You know you want to go back to giving Wendy's, Wendy.
It's you. I know you.
I do find it funny how Wendy recognizes Hank, but Hank doesn't even bother trying to explain to Gomi why, at least not on screen. Hank reveals that he's confiscated the duffel bag full of money found in Jesse's car and flaunts the cash in front of Jesse to try to get him to talk, under the false promise that he may be able to keep some of the money if he does. And this isn't the last time that we'll see Hank try to flaunt confiscated money in front of a suspect to try to get them to talk under the false promise that they might be able to keep some of it, but we'll get there when we get there. With this being the first time that Jesse and Hank speak face to face, some may not remember how significant of a scene this actually is in retrospect, considering all the things to come between the two of them in the future. Also, Hank continues the trend of being right, and wrong. This time in regard to thinking that Jesse knew who Tuco was, that he was at the crime scene himself, and that he knows who shot Tuco, except for the fact that Hank doesn't think Jesse had it in him to be the one to shoot Tuco himself. But back to Walt. He tells his psychiatrist that the fugue state was a lie, and gives a handful of reasons as to why he would fake it, which reminds me a lot of when Skylar lashed out and vented to Hank about her problems in 201. It's interesting how although the fugue state was a lie, and even though Walt's excuse to the psychiatrist about why he faked the fugue state is a lie, Walt's reasoning to the psychiatrist about it is very much real.
My 15-year-old son has cerebral palsy. I am an extremely overqualified high school chemistry teacher. I have watched all of my colleagues and friends surpass me in every way imaginable, and within 18 months, I will be dead. And you ask why I ran?
Meanwhile, Hank brings Jesse what he thinks is his ace in the hole, Hector, who was found in the shack where Hank killed Tuco, which is what the whole dinging at the end of the last episode was implying. Although Hector could totally sell Jesse down the river, his cartel mentality causes him to refuse to talk to the DEA, even if doing so would help bring justice to Tuco's death. Speaking of which, Hector may not consider getting Jesse arrested as true justice, since the Salamancas truly believe in blood for blood. I absolutely love how Jesse says how Hector doesn't even know what planet he's on, but Gomi proves that Hector does.
I mean, look at this dude, alright? He doesn't even know what planet he's living on.
Are we on the planet Mars? Are we on the planet Saturn? Are we on the planet Earth?
Anyways, this results in a huge Breaking Bad cringe moment as Hector craps his pants while staring at Hank and Gomi as an unspoken F you response to Hank asking him if he wants to help them out, as Hector has old cartel roots and will never help the DEA. What makes this so funny is the fact that Hector only does this after he proves that he's in a right state of mind, implying that he could talk but that he won't, which is just insult to injury. So Jesse gets released and asks his dad over the phone if he can pick him up, but not only does his dad not want to give him a ride, he implies that he doesn't even want to see him anytime in the near future, so instead Jesse and Wendy head over to Waffle House. So with Jesse released from the DEA and Walt soon to be released from the hospital, it appears that Walt's plan worked, but it comes with its own problems. Since Jesse's now broke due to Hank confiscating his money, he wants Walt to help him financially, but Walt doesn't seem to care, instead just selfishly thinking of himself, worried if Hank mentioned him at all or not. Jesse assures Walt that the DEA doesn't know anything, causing Walt to tell Jesse that they need to cook, even after everything that's happened.
So we can cook.
You still want to cook?
Seriously. What's changed, Jesse?
Walt rhetorically asks Jesse what's changed before hanging up, as Walt still needs that $737K to provide for his family, and the creators make sure that we realize that this is still Walt's motives as he calculates in the hospital bed how much drugs they have to cook in order for him to acquire that dollar amount. Now while doing so, Walt has an epiphany and remembers that he left all of his cash and Jesse's gun in that diaper box at his house, so he somehow sneaks out of the hospital and into his house in order to secure it before his family finds it, if they haven't yet already. After all the effort that Walt is going through to make this fugue state excuse, it would be all for nothing if Skylar Jr. came across what was truly inside that diaper box. After successfully securing it, as Walt returns to the hospital, we get a quick montage of him doing so to the cover song Waiting Around to Die by the Be Good Tanyas, as he ponders his current life choices. Side note, probably pronounced that wrong. Sorry. I absolutely love this song, and it's extremely fitting for Walt's situation, as he'd rather do something with his final days than just wait around to die, even if it's something negative, being a criminal. Fun fact, this song was actually used during the intros to the 4th and final season of Telltale's The Walking Dead games, which is why this rang such a hard bell for me when I rewatched this episode, because like, wait, did I know this song from somewhere? And sure enough, yeah, even though obviously it was in this show first. Also, when Walt gets back to his hospital room, he stares at the painting on the wall that depicts a man in a boat paddling away towards a ship while his family waves goodbye. This isn't the only time that we see this painting in the show, and it implies how Walt is alienating himself from his family, which is the emotion that he felt on his way back to the hospital after spying on Skylar and Jr. in the kitchen without him. Side note, the way that Walt puts his IV back into his hand is not only incredibly difficult to watch, to the point that I don't even think I can show it on YouTube, but it's also extremely unrealistic, as the needle would have just went straight through his vein. Back at the DEA office, Hank rewatches footage of the barrel heist as Gomi and him discuss the crystal that they found at the desert shack where Tuco died, with this being the first time that they've ever gotten their hands on blue sky. Hank says how it's the purest their lab has ever seen, with the original cook from episode 101 back during the Crazy 8 arc being the close second. Hank realizes that it's all connected with a simple explanation that he can't figure out, to the point that it's making his head hurt. Again, Hank is correct in his assumptions, but as the connective tissue here is Walt and Jesse, it continues the theme of them being right under Hank's nose, especially now more than ever since Hank just questioned Jesse. Gomi then tricks Hank to leave the office to a surprise party thrown by the whole office as Hank is celebrated for finding and taking out Tuco, even if it was by wild coincidence. They joke about how the custom cake has his big gut right, and Gomi gives him a present of Tuco's grill encased in a lucite cube, which is a rather morbid trophy as a present. And then we see Walt released from the hospital, with Junior insisting that he drinks his apple juice, showing how much he does care for his father's well-being. Hank shows up and Junior instantly asks about the shootout, but Hank downplays it, instead concerned about Walt's health. Walt apologizes for going missing due to Hank putting himself in danger trying to find him, but Hank just brushes it off and downplays it, focusing on the positives instead of the negatives. Hank mentions how his entire office is treating him like some hero, and he shows Walt and Junior Tuco's grill encased in lucite, which clearly bothers Walt all things considered. But he doesn't say anything and just, pretends to act oblivious. Back at home, Walt feels happy to be there, but Skylar comes across as cold, clearly offended that Walt is hiding something from him. Walt later tries making light of his whole fugue state, but he puts on his Heisenberg hat while he does so, which is odd to me. Is him joking about going to 7-Eleven naked with the Heisenberg hat an implication of how he faked his fugue state in order to cover up his criminal Heisenberg-related activities, or am I just overthinking it? Anyways, as they get into bed, the realization of what's truly happened is starting to catch up to Skylar. After Walt was found, she was initially relieved, ready to believe anything, just happy that he's safe and sound. But now that some time has passed, she's starting to ponder if the fugue state was real, along with the idea of Walt having a second cell phone. If he's lying about having a second cell phone and he has this huge secret, then, maybe he could be lying about the fugue state as well. She confronts him on having a second cell phone, but Walt denies it, along with deflecting, ever remembering the phone call that he got before he disappeared due to his fugue state. Whenever Walt lies to his family and or gives them excuses, he always acts in a certain naively innocent and oblivious way that could be considered his poker tell. In a way, he definitely plays that up here in this moment. Whether Skylar has known him for long enough to notice whenever he acts like it, I'm not sure, but regardless, she doesn't buy his ignorant excuses, and the episode ends with her going to sleep without kissing Walt, with that being enough for Walt to realize that she in fact does not believe him. We'll circle back to this by the season finale and even just a few episodes from now, but this is notably one of the first breadcrumbs to set up Skylar learning the truth of all of Walt's lies. This episode gets a strong B tier. It's a great episode for what it's worth, with many subtle moments that I enjoy, but nothing crazy outlandish happened like the last episode, as 203 is the aftermath of sorts from 202. But even though no one gets shot or killed, that's completely okay, as this show is a character study down to its core, with this episode being a prime example of that, which I really enjoy. Season 2, Episode 4. Down. This episode features Walt and Jesse respectively going through incredibly bad times, as we jump back and forth between Jesse struggling, being broke with no home, while Skylar repeatedly gives Walt the cold shoulder due to him being unable to tell her the truth of what's been going on. Before we get into any of that though, we first get our second cold open black and white flash forward, this time elaborating on and cementing the fact that it is Walt's pool that the pink teddy bear and its disconnected eyeball are in. We then see the teddy bear get fished out and placed in one of a long line of evidence bags, with the final item being glasses that look exactly like Walt's. As you may know, the black and white season 2 cold opens drip feed us hints towards the mystery, with us getting more clues drip fed to us each time, implying that some tragedy has happened at Walt's house and to his family. Fun fact, while starting out the season, the creators knew that the teddy bear fell from the sky, but it wasn't until down the road while working in season 2 that they cemented the true reasoning. So after the intro sequence, Walt and Jesse meet up at a convenience store where they plan their next move, which in this case is to not move at all. After their last phone call where Walt told Jesse that they'd cook again, Jesse's impatient to do so as he's broke after Hank confiscated all of his money. Walt convinced Jesse to continue being cook partners, but now that Jesse's ready to, Walt's holding back as he needs time for his family to settle down after the whole fugue state ordeal, as to now he's not even able to leave the house for more than 20 minutes without them worrying. This shows how Walt sees the aftermath of how his family feels and cares about him as an inconvenience, implying his potential lack of sympathy for how he made them feel. Now, Walt not wanting to cook frustrates Jesse, as he thought that Walt would straight away, considering that he had previously said so over the phone, as Jesse needs income to pay for the expenses that he's dealing with. Since Jesse lost his half share of the money, he expects Walt to give him half of his own share, effectively leaving them both with a quarter the original amount. Although Walt gives Jesse an envelope with $600 to tide him over, Walt refuses to have to pay for Jesse's carelessness, as he puts it, as the money that Walt still has is rightfully his half. Now, as a cop walks into the store, Walt stalls Jesse by telling him that they'll settle things later. The scene gives multiple examples of Walt still selfishly putting himself first before caring for Jesse, as not only will he not help Jesse out by giving him half of his share, but we also see Walt's selfishness in the form of Walt quietly demanding that he gets to leave the store first, while Jesse has to wait around to leave second, with the cop there. Now, as the show goes on, we'll see Walt learn to control his selfish urges and instead treat Jesse as his equal, with this episode being somewhat of a big step towards that, but we'll circle back to that by the final scene. So we then see Skylar wake up the next morning, worried that Walt isn't in bed beside him, when in reality he's cooking breakfast in the kitchen. This further shows what Walt tried telling Jesse about in the previous scene, in regard to his family constantly worried about him due to being affected by his disappearance, with Skylar clearly having formed some sort of trauma from it. As Junior shows up for his obligatory breakfast scene of the episode, Walt tries winning them over with breakfast, which is one of his quality traits whenever he's in trouble with his family. As we tend to see throughout the show, Walt only makes his family meals when he's trying to win them back from upsetting them in some way, which seems to be his way of saying sorry without actually being honest about whatever he did to upset them. Although Skylar is initially impressed, with this being one of the first times that he's done so, at least on screen, the more and more times that he does this throughout the show, and especially this episode, the more jaded Skylar becomes, as she eventually sees right through the charade. Here in this scene, Skylar is both impressed but slightly suspicious of Walt's caring generosity, since while he does the dishes for her, he shows interest in her fictional short stories, which is one of the only times that we really ever hear about it at this point. But he does this to the point that he even offers to go with her to a seminar about how to get her book published. As Walt casually brings up an excuse about Skylar previously questioning him over having a second cell phone, it becomes clear to her that he's just buttering her up all morning to score some gravy points before throwing this disingenuous excuse at her. It's very manipulative of Walt, and Skylar realizes this for multiple reasons implied by the camera zooming in on her reaction, resulting in her leaving the house by the time Walt finally turns around to look at her. Since Walt could tell that Skylar didn't previously believe him, denying having a second cell phone in bed at the end of the last episode, he's clearly anxious about it, and so he brings it up as he wants to bury the hatchet by convincing Skylar that he doesn't have a second cell phone when we know that he actually does. Walt's seemingly impatient for Skylar to trust him on this, so he tries forcing that on her, as he probably thinks that facing the conflict head on by bringing it up himself in order to try and convince her to believe this excuse will solve the problem, trying to almost disarm her of the fact, but it just makes it worse and it makes what he's doing more obvious. If Walt didn't have a second cell phone, he probably wouldn't have brought it up again, so the fact that he is bringing it up while trying to excuse it as a misunderstanding actually furthers Skylar to believe that he is in fact hiding something. If Walt would have just made them breakfast and took Skylar to the seminar and left it at that, maybe this all would have worked, but by bringing up the second cell phone directly, he effectively just undid all the gravy points that he just won over. Whether he thinks that bringing up the second cell phone while acting innocent about it is some sort of reverse psychology, I'm not sure, but regardless, it clearly doesn't work. This is because she can tell that Walt is worried about her not believing him, and the only reason why he would be so worried about that is if he was actually guilty. Plus, buttering her up first before bringing it up implies that all this kindness that morning was premeditated as a trick to put her in a good mood leading up to his excuse. As I said earlier, whenever Walt's lying to Skylar or hiding something from her, he always acts in an innocently polite, caring, and naive way that he wouldn't normally. He did this when he lied about still working at the car wash in season 1, he did so while while creating the lie about the fugue state, he does so here with the second cell phone, and he will continue to do so time and time again throughout the rest of the show, as I'll be sure to point out. Meanwhile, Jesse's brought to a meeting with his parents and their lawyer as they reveal to him that they're selling his aunt's house due to finding his lab in the basement after Hank went and saw his mom while he was still kidnapped by Tuco. Since his parents technically own the property, they're using the threat of his lab to kick him out of the house so they can sell it before the government finds out about it and seizes the entire property. Fun fact, this plotline of Jesse losing his aunt's house was only created because the show creators actually lost the house as a filming location in real life due to the house owner selling it, which is why Jesse eventually gets the apartment beside Jane. Although the creators don't like creating certain plotlines due to in real life conflicts or influences, I think it worked out well considering it jump-started Jesse's depressing arc. This episode made him more strapped for cash, and it also helped blossom the whole Jane arc, along with what happens in season 3 episode 2 in regard to Jesse using Saul against his parents, but I'll put a pin in that for now, as we'll of course get more into that in the season 3 tier list. Anyways, Walt's been waiting for Skylar to come home to confront her all day due to his charade that morning clearly not working, and we see him contemplating how to do so by first pretending to be casually reading a magazine as if he wasn't waiting for all day, before deciding to just stand up and confront her head on as she walks in the door. This is undercut by her not giving him the time of day. She passive-aggressively dismisses him by not telling him where she was. To elaborate on what I just said a few moments ago, Walt clearly does nice things that he thinks Skylar would want when he feels guilty, such as in this scene where he tells her how he fixed the bouncing garage door, or telling her that he's going to continue going to the cancer support group, but Skylar isn't fooled by it anymore. Walt's advances of kindness fall flat as Skylar gives him hollow and fake positive responses, as she doesn't want to call him out for hiding something, just like how he can't admit that he's hiding something himself. We then see Jesse's mom wake him out of bed as it's revealed that all of his possessions in the house are being confiscated and taken to storage. As Jesse hides his paraphernalia, pathetically, he tries giving his mom a ton of empty promises to convince her that he's turning his life around, but considering her reaction, you can tell that she's heard this one too many times and doesn't believe him as much as she wishes that she could. Jesse then explains how he earned his aunt's house due to how much he took care of her before she died, and even though his mom calls him out for exaggerating, Jesse still implies that he did more for his aunt than his mom ever did as her sister. Of course, assuming the aunt is on the mom's side and not the dad. And then the next morning, as Walt cooks another one of his make-up breakfasts, he greets Junior's friend Lewis at the door. He always drives Lewis to school. Lewis politely declines coming in for breakfast when Walt gives him the invitation, along with revealing that Junior would rather be called by his new nickname Flynn. Walt questions Skylar about this, with Skylar implying Walt's suspicions to be true that Lewis knows about his fugue state and how he was found naked in a supermarket, which may have embarrassed Junior to the point that he's now trying to distance his association with Walt by giving himself this new Flynn nickname, which obviously insults Walt. Although Junior now going by Flynn may be a result of the whole fugue state, it doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't love or respect his father anymore. As Skylar says, Junior does want his own identity, which is part of him growing up. Fun fact, Vince Gilligan is actually a junior himself, with his full name being George Vincent Gilligan Jr. As a kid, his friends called him by his middle name Vince to differentiate himself from his father, George Sr. Anyways, Skylar's passive aggressiveness continues as she undermines the whole Flynn thing, while stating how she already knew about it, ignoring the fact that she never informed Walt. This may be her implying that if Walt's not going to tell her about stuff, then she's not going to bother telling him stuff either. Then, as Walt invites her for breakfast, she states that she's going out, without telling him where, once again. Then, in order to get him to leave her alone, she passive-aggressively hints that he should go answer the phone, which is hilariously Jesse calling him again, which honestly completely validates why Skylar's acting this way towards him. As much as Skylar's passive-aggressiveness rubbed me the wrong way, I do understand how this is really the only way she can think of to get back at Walt for what he's done. Although Skylar is being petty, what Walt has done and still does to her is infinitely worse. It's wild how even though Skylar's technically the victim in this, since we follow Walt as the protagonist, we're naturally inclined to take his side of the situation, even when he's the one in the wrong. Anyways, this marks yet another instance where Jesse tries contacting Walt by calling his house phone, even though the very second episode of the show made it clear how that's a bad idea.
My name is Skylar White, yo.
So Walt freaks out at Jesse over this, especially since he told Jesse that they should have no contact while at the convenience store earlier in the episode. From Walt's perspective, he told Jesse not to contact him while he's trying to mend things with his family. Now, not only is Walt failing to do so, but Jesse's bothering him by going against what he said and calling him right in the middle of it. From Jesse's perspective, he's broke, being kicked out of his house, has no way to acquire any income, so he needs to turn to Walt to help as he has no other option. Although it was wrong for Jesse to call Walt's house directly, again, to be fair, I don't think Walt has gotten a new cell phone yet, and his selfishness shines here once more, as this results in him having an argument to the point that he hangs up on Jesse. As Jesse tries to call back, Walt becomes so enraged that he rips his phone out of the wall, with Jesse's phone being taken away from him by the movers right after as a parallel, which also acts as insult to injury of the whole situation. Also, this scene is where we get yet another memorable and iconic line from Jesse where he says,
and thanks Daddy Warbucks, but that was before my housing situation went completely testicular on me.
So Jesse tries crashing at an old friend's house who he used to be in a band with during high school, but the friend's wife quickly forces him to kick Jesse out, showing who really wears the pants in the family. We then see him using a payphone at the same convenience store as earlier, where he's unable to couch surf at any other friend's houses, even including Badger, Skinny Peter combo. After taking his anger out on the payphone, he turns the corner to reveal that his bike's been stolen, with his hobo friend that we saw from earlier clearly not doing anything to prevent it, while acting completely oblivious to the fact that he just watched someone steal it.
Hey, someone took your bike, man. Not cool.
Not cool? Like, screw you, you drunk, don't act like you care when you just sat there and let it happen. Now granted, it's not like I expect a random hobo to do something about it, but just the way that he's like, someone stole your bike, man, not cool, while he clearly watched it happen is just insult to injury. Also, Jesse's bike is the same one that we saw in his garage during season 1, and the broken bike lock that's left behind is the same bike lock that was used on Crazy 8. So with nowhere to go, Jesse decides to sneak into the private lot where Badger's cousin is keeping the RV. However, while climbing the fence, he ends up falling into the outhouse on the other side. Side note, when I mentioned in my season 1 tier list how I was honestly surprised that the guard trapped in the outhouse during the barrel heist didn't somehow get knocked over while inside it, and that didn't mean that I wanted that trope to happen, but rather I was just surprised that it didn't. Here, however, this trope does happen, but in a slightly original way, as instead of the outhouse being knocked over while Jesse's inside it, he literally falls through the roof. Also, as Jesse rolls out of the outhouse, I get that he's already covered and he's sad and depressed so he doesn't care, but it still bothers me just how long he lays in it and rolls around in it before getting up. So Jesse manages to waddle his way over to the RV, where he's pretty much completely hit rock bottom, circling back to the name of the episode Down, as it is a huge downer to see him like this. It just breaks my heart, honestly. He's so smelly from the outhouse that he literally needs to put on a gas mask in order to tolerate his own stench, which is incredibly depressing. And to be honest, I'm also surprised that he didn't bother removing his outhouse covered clothes before entering the RV to sleep for the night, but the fact that he doesn't just makes it all that much more sad. As I just mentioned, he's completely broken by this point that he simply doesn't even care anymore. But as kind of a fun fact, the creators were initially going to have a German Shepherd find Jesse in the junkyard and essentially trap him inside the RV, but they decided against it because it would have been too difficult and expensive to fly out a trained dog to fill the role. Anyways, the next morning, we see Walt clearly bothered by how Skylar is going, quote, out yet again without telling him where, to the point that he's now given up trying to make apologetic breakfast. Junior's completely oblivious to what's going on, as he just wonders where Skylar is, along with breakfast, of course. Instead of trying to explain the situation or come up with an excuse, Walt decides to take his mind off of things by taking Junior out to do something fun to bond over. However, Walt's idea of something fun is trying to teach Junior how to drive, which turns out to be kind of the exact opposite. Granted, it's probably different for everyone, but if you've ever had a parent try to teach you how to drive, it's a trope that you may find it relatable, as sometimes it can be anything but fun. So Walt tries to politely correct Junior from using both feet on the pedals. With Junior's naivete, he doesn't understand how that's improper, which is something that new drivers ask when they first try to learn. Walt tries forcing Junior to only use one foot, which ends badly as he almost crashes the car, resulting in him hitting over a traffic barrier. Walt once again bites his lip and instead just gets out of the vehicle to move the barrier back, which is kind of a comedic scene in itself as we get that long shot of it. Meanwhile, Badger's cousin wakes up and notices the mess that Jesse left behind while breaking in, and so he confronts Jesse with a shotgun, assuming he's some thief or random hobo. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I really don't like this guy and I dread every single scene with him. Anyways, Jesse comes across as a broke junkie with false promises, even though we, the audience, believe him. Jesse begs for a break, bike, but of course this white trash won't give it to him, resulting in Jesse finally reaching his breaking point, resulting in him sneaking back in and stealing the RV while driving through the gates in order to do so. There's a lot of horrible things that have happened to Jesse that's led him to this point in this season, so let's have a quick recap by just reading down the list. He got kidnapped by Tuco, almost killed multiple times, all of his money was confiscated by the DEA, he lost his car, he got kicked out of his house by his parents, his bike was stolen, none of his friends give him a place to crash, he falls into an outhouse, and he almost gets his RV taken from him after having a shotgun shoved in his face. This is the definition of the whole "it can't get any worse" cliche, as it seems to no matter what. Things can definitely get much worse for him, and they do over and over again. Meanwhile, Skylar's passive aggressiveness has seemingly come to a head as it's worn down Walt to the point that he requests to have a talk with her. Walt vaguely apologizes for everything, but he's still unable to tell her the truth of what's been going on, which results in his apology ringing hollow. Although Skylar agrees with Walt's sentiment, she's still standoffish due to Walt not being entirely truthful. Here in the scene, we see both of them are, at first, unable to speak the truth. Skylar eggs Walt on to confess what she's suspicious of without directly accusing him, while Walt acts completely oblivious and ignorant to what she's mad about when in reality, they both know exactly what's caused this conflict. Walt admits that he's not having an affair, but still pretends to be oblivious of any wrongdoing, which is kind of ironic. If he's not having an affair, then the alternative must be much worse, and it seems that Skylar can tell. Walt isn't looking for a way to tell her the truth, but is rather essentially looking for a way to trick her into believing that he's not up to something. Skylar can tell and is done being so gullible. This is where Skylar finally calls Walt out for his desperate breakfasts and hollow apologies, demanding to know what's really going on. But when he can't tell her, she storms out of the house. In this show, there's 4 main moments where Walt has the chance to finally come clean to Skylar about everything. This is the second instance of this happening, paralleling the first instance, which was at the end of episode 103, I believe, where he told her about his cancer instead. This is an incredibly important scene for the relationship between Walt and Skylar, and I will be circling back to this by the season 2 finale.
You don't want to lose contact with me, Walt? Good. Then tell me. Now.
Tell you what?
So as Walt chases Skylar out to her car, he notices that Jesse has pulled up to his house with the RV. From Walt's perspective, he's incredibly angry at Jesse's attempts to reach out after Walt explicitly said no contact. First the phone calls to his house, and now this, literally parking their rolling lab in front of his house. As Walt freaks out over Jesse being so stupid, Jesse once again brings up how he wants Walt to give him half of his share.
Why are you blue? You actually this stupid.
No, look, I know this isn't an optimal
To come
situation.
to my house and park on my street driving this vehicle, I mean, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm really asking.
This results in Walt clarifying how although Jesse had all of his money taken, Walt's share is just that, his, and he isn't obligated to give Jesse half of his share just because Jesse lost his.
Your half? There is no your half of the money. There is only my all of it. Do you understand?
This results in them getting in a hilarious little scuffle due to Jesse snapping from being yelled at by Walt after everything he's been struggling with the past few days. This results in Jesse easily overpowering Walt, where Walt eggs Jesse on to continue, but Jesse stops as he realizes that beating up Walt won't solve his problems or make him feel any better. So as Jesse lets Walt go, they both lie there, showing that they both hit their own respective lowest points of the series so far. Jesse has nothing and nowhere to go, while Walt has effectively alienated himself from Skylar, which is exactly what he was trying to prevent. So it is Jesse's fault that he had all of his money in his car for the DEA to confiscate, but he couldn't have known that Tuco was going to kidnap him right as he was about to skip town with it, which Walt recommended. You could follow the domino effect of blame all the way back to the very first episode in regard to who is to blame for what, but at the end of the day, they are partners and should look out for each other. So helping out Jesse financially is the least that Walt can do, and he eventually realizes this. Although Walt isn't obligated to give Jesse any of his money, this conflict of Jesse requesting it is meant to help Walt learn to care for Jesse and to not be so selfish. Up to this point in time, Walt has always put himself and his own problems first as a priority over Jesse or any problems that Jesse may also be dealing with. Walt has also been so caught up in his own family drama that he hasn't considered the hardships that Jesse's been going through. But finally, Walt acknowledges Jesse's situation and decides to give in and help him in his time of need. For the third time now, I find it interesting how Jesse continues to stay covered in the blue disgustingness from the outhouse. First I was surprised that he didn't crawl out of the goop quicker, then I was surprised that he fell asleep in it, and now I'm surprised that Walt even lets him walk around in his house while in it. He does say don't touch anything, but still. Now although this may just be done for dramatic effect, it still works well in my eyes regardless of my nitpicks, as keeping Jesse in that disgusting clothing symbolizes the terrible situation that he's in, along with showing how he's in such a horrible place right now that he doesn't even care about his horrible hygiene. Granted, Jesse does wash his hands in the sink, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg of the problem. After Walt gives Jesse his money, Walt asks him if he wants breakfast, paralleling his desperate breakfast for Skylar. This is a small subtle moment, but it speaks volumes in regard to Walt now starting to care more about Jesse, along with him genuinely wanting to make Jesse breakfast as a gesture of kindness, opposed to how Walt was making Skylar breakfast with an ulterior motive. Due to this, although Skylar's unable to appreciate his breakfast, at least Jesse will. Meanwhile, the episode ends with a random woman in a parking lot gas station judging Skylar for buying and smoking a cigarette considering she's pregnant, but Skylar's so distraught over her conflict with Walt that she doesn't even care, and lights the cigarette anyways as the song It's Such a Pretty World Today performed by Nancy Sinatra plays. And this also shows how, during Skylar's time going out, while not telling Walt where she's going, she's not actually really doing anything. She's just purposely doing this to piss him off while still thinking about it the whole time, so she's not even really doing anything to get her mind off of it. This episode gets an A tier, and I feel like this episode is incredibly underrated. This internal conflict between Skylar and Walt is perfectly executed as it's been set up and built throughout the entire series of the show. And it's just a major story beat of what will continue to happen for the rest of the show that builds off of this. It's a completely natural progression of the wall that gets built up to separate Walt from his family due to his criminal actions, with this being just one breaking point of many still to come. Also, Jesse hitting rock bottom is incredibly depressing, and it makes you really feel bad for him after everything he's been through. Jesse wanting Walt to help him financially is also a great inner conflict that helps build their bond by the end of the episode, as Walt finally decides to help Jesse even though he technically isn't obligated to. Jesse getting his money taken in the first place is also one of many examples of Walt and Jesse taking one step forward but two steps back. Anytime in the show where they make a lot of money or product, they always lose it in one way or another and are essentially reset back to step one. There's a few more instances even in this season that I can think of this happening, so just keep that in mind for now, as this show is trying to get across the idea that although it may seem fruitful in the moment, in the end, crime doesn't pay. Season 2 Episode 5, Breakage. This episode starts with a mysterious flash forward that'll be answered by the end of the same episode, which includes the paperweight of Tuco's grill encased in lucite being found in the lake. How did it end up there? Stay tuned to find out. After the intro sequence, we get a very unsettling montage of Walt at his treatments, followed by him talking to his doctor alone without Skylar there, as she's still mad at him over, well, everything. His doctor notices Skylar's absence, and Walt lies about their relationship being all good, even though he can tell that something's up. As Walt gets his bill for his treatment printed out, I like this little detail of Walt throwing out the hope pin that the receptionist gives him, implying how he doesn't expect to live much longer anyways, which we will be discussing more in depth in a few episodes. As Walt arrives home, he greets Skylar, who's stressing out over the hospital bill of Walt's 3-day stay from his fugue state, with the bill being at least $13,000. As if the treatments weren't enough, now there's this bill on top of it too. Walt notices the smell of cigarettes on her, but she brushes it off. Walt states how he'll get Gretchen and Elliot to handle it, causing Skylar to give him the bill while still purposely feeling distant from him. That night, Walt counts up his remaining drug money to pay the bills, which is quickly running thin after giving Jesse half of it. Walt then finds that Skylar flushed a pack of cigarettes down the toilet after unclogging it, giving him something to now confront her over. Meanwhile, Hank gets a promotion to be transferred to El Paso due to his accomplishment of taking out Tuco, but as we know, he's secretly not the total badass that he's chalked up to be. He keeps up appearances by pretending to be excited over it, just like how he pretended to be hyped over taking down Tuco when in reality, there's a lot more going on in his head that he's trying to cope with. Hank is already suffering from PTSD over his gunfight with Tuco, and now, this promotion is just amplifying it, as we can see his panic attack in the elevator. Hank fears that going to El Paso means that something similar will happen again, if not worse, due to El Paso having so much cartel activity. You can even hear the sound of Jesse's lowrider bouncing up and down while Hank has his panic attack. I love how this show continues to elaborate on the lasting effects of the whole Tuco arc, even episodes after his death. Unlike other shows that would just simply move on, Breaking Bad not only emphasizes action scenes and life or death situations due to them being so few and far between, but the show also elaborates heavily on how those crazy situations impact the involved characters. Usually you'd think that maybe one Aftermath episode would be enough, but events surrounding Tuco practically ripple out throughout the rest of the season, whether in regard to Walt, Jesse, or even Hank with his PTSD, causing him to struggle over his new promotion, which everyone expects him to be excited about. Meanwhile, now that Jesse has money from Walt, he returns to Badger's cousin to pay him back what he owes, plus extra for the fence and outhouse. Jesse doesn't do this out of just the kindness of his heart, however, as he uses this good faith to convince the dude to charge him to store the RV in his yard. After negotiating that, Jesse buys a used ride from the guy, which turns out to be his second pick after the first car that he looked at was too expensive, a blue El Camino. So with Jesse's cheap new ride, he goes to check out an apartment to rent, which looks like the last option out of all of the ones that he thought of, where we get the introduction to Jessica Jones, Jane. Jesse manages to convince her to rent the place to him even though he can't give any documentation of his income. She quickly deduces that he's a drug dealer of some kind and that he's giving her a fake last name, but still gives in as she relates to him in regard to being a screw-up disappointment in the eyes of his parents. Meanwhile, we see that Hank has been purposely procrastinating and delaying the inevitable that is his job promotion to El Paso. He doesn't want to go so badly that he's fake calling in sick while instead brewing up a batch of his homemade Schrader Brow. Hank's fear of going to El Paso has seemingly gotten to the point that he doesn't even want to go into work in general, as there he'll just be constantly reminded of it while having to pretend to be happy about it and push to go do so when in reality he feels the exact opposite. Marie confronts him on this, to which he brushes her off. During this scene, I love the subtle moments that include Hank singing a jingle to his own drink, which is actually based off of a legitimate jingle for a drink that Hank clearly took inspiration from, along with the anticlimactic cinematic shots of Marie standing in front of the garage door as it opens and closes. Also, as much as Marie hates her therapist Dave, who's supposed to be helping her with her klepto tendencies, she only seems to bring them up here to use Dave's advice against Hank in a passive-aggressive manner.
Please don't tell me to relax. You know I hate that. Dave said I should express that.
As Marie leaves, Hank's frustration in her confronting him over the reality of this current situation gets to him, to the point that he seals a bottle with too much force, causing it to break in his hand, injuring himself. This isn't the only instance of this happening, where we see an example of how Hank is improperly doing his hobby, showing how even using it as a distraction isn't enough to keep his mind off things, which we'll see more of later on. We then see Jesse bring the RV out to the desert to meet up with Walt, where they plan to cook for the first time since the whole Tuco fiasco. As Jesse arrives, Walt appears to be zoned out, rubbing his wedding ring, which is clearly symbolic of him thinking over his current conflicts with Skylar. Although working as a criminal has already created a barrier between himself and his family, he still continues to do so regardless of the potential isolation it'll cause him to have from his family.
After completing my first round of treatment and financing the world's most expensive alibi, huh? Zero! Zip nothing! I've got nothing to show for all of this! Nothing for my family, which, as you might remember, was the whole damn point!
Even though he's getting positive results from his doctor, he's still in the mindset that he'll die soon, meaning that he doesn't plan on dealing with any consequences of his actions long term, and after everything he's already been through, he may be feeling a sort of sunk cost fallacy in order to try and get ahead again after everything that he's lost. Walt clearly still plans to cook to provide for his family under the hopes that they won't completely hate him by the end of it. So as they begin their cook, Jesse wonders why they're even cooking if they have no means to sell what they make. Walt naively plans to go back to Jesse slinging crystal every night by himself, even though he was initially displeased with the amount that Jesse was able to sell by himself near the end of season 1. Walt is willing to cut his losses and deal with a slower income, but Jesse refuses to do it himself now due to being profiled by the DEA, meaning that he'll be watched closely from now on and can't act as a solo dealer. Walt also finds Jesse's stress of paying bills amusing, considering Walt's medical bills are far more expensive. However, Jesse implies that he's trying to grow up, and with that comes responsibilities that he's never had to deal with before. Here we get another instance of Jesse admitting how they always take one step forward and 2 steps back, in regard to Jesse complaining about how he spent more money than he's made. No matter how successful they may feel in a certain instance, the new lows always seem to outweigh the old highs in regard to the success of their criminal business. Walt continues to pile onto this idea by lashing out over how after all of his medical bills from treatment and his fugue state, he has absolutely nothing to show for everything that's happened so far in the series. No matter how much Walt has cooked, sold, and even killed, it's been in vain so far, as he feels like he's back to square one. Walt, however, refuses to call it quits, so since he doesn't want to work with another Tuco, he assumes that the only way to move forward is to get Jesse to sell dime baggies one by one. Jesse suggests becoming their own Tuco, which means setting up a structure where they can create a network of street dealers beneath them to sell their product for them. Walt feels uncomfortable over bringing more people on board who he doesn't know and therefore may not be able to trust, but Jesse uses Walt's own motto against him of being an equal partnership, as Jesse reminds Walt that he wanted to handle production while allowing Jesse to handle distribution.
This is a partnership, remember?
I remember. Yeah, you cook. I sell. That was the division of labor when we started all this. And that's exactly how we should have kept it.
If they want to be able to distribute what they produce, Walt is gonna have to let Jesse do it his own way, which includes hiring foot soldiers for themselves. Not only does this keep them out of potential danger by putting their dealers on the street instead of themselves, if Jesse hires multiple dealers, they'll be able to sell way more than Jesse ever could on his own. I love how Jesse acknowledges how he was never kidnapped or held at gunpoint before he ever partnered up with Walt, recognizing how crazy the events that they've gone through together have been. So as we know, Walt is incredibly stubborn and egotistical to the point that he has trouble genuinely admitting any wrongdoing at all ever, as his apologies are usually only manipulative tactics with an angle that he's working towards. With that in mind, Walt actually reluctantly admits to having a difficult learning curve in regard to him previously not having any street smarts, resulting into him being overly ambitious.
All right, I will admit to a bit of a learning curve.
Oh.
And perhaps I was overly ambitious.
Now, both of these admissions, along with the entire scene in general, constantly makes me think back to the scene of Walt yelling at Jesse to grow some balls in season 1, which is of course the same scene where Walt gave Jesse a hard time for not making enough money as a solo street dealer. As I've said, Walt was clearly uneducated in how criminals operate, resulting in him thinking that they can just easily work out a deal with Tuco and live happily ever after. Due to all the horrible experiences that they've dealt with by doing things on Walt's command, Jesse puts his foot down by giving Walt the ultimatum of either doing things his way this time or he'll quit. This is also one of the only times in the entire series where Jesse calls Walt by his first name instead of Mr. White, which has the same energy as a student in a school calling their teacher by their first name, or even a kid or teenager calling their parents by their first name for the first time when mad at them instead of just mom or dad.
In any case, it's not gonna happen that way anymore.
Yeah, damn straight. Know why? Because we do things my way this time, or I walk. You need me more than I need you, Walt.
So Jesse has this plan to introduce a network of street dealers to work under them, but where are they going to find people they can trust? This answer of course comes in the form of Jesse's existing friends that we've been slowly introduced to on the side, being Skinny Pete, Badger, and Combo. So as Jesse invites them all over to talk business, he first gives them a quick tour of his new apartment. In retrospect, it's honestly kind of depressing to hear all of Jesse's aspirations to furnish the place, considering how he never ends up doing so due to the tragedy of the conclusion of the Jane arc. Speaking of which, there is one thing that Jesse talks about here that he does end up getting, being a big wall-mounted TV, as we'll come to see in episodes 207 and 208. Jesse does a convincing job selling his friends on the idea of working for them as a big opportunity, with the promise of making fat stacks due to having high quality product, along with there being apparently an opening in the market as there's not much competition around. Jesse sets out ground rules to never cut or short the product, and excites them over the potential of being able to move up the chain the more they sell and the better they do, stating how there's always more to sell. He even plays it safe by organizing blind drops, aka dead drops, for them to pick up the product from, separating the transaction in a safer way. Jesse concludes the meeting by stating DBAA, showing how he's already incorporating interactions from Jane into his life, as DBAA, don't be an a-hole, is what Jane had previously said to him in the earlier scene when they first met.
And in addition to first and last, I went 2 more months. DBAA fee, non-refundable.
Yeah, of course, no problem. DBAA, obviously, yeah. Okay, so what's DBAA?
Don't be an asshole.
Okay, DBAA, mofos, all right? Apply yourselves.
Jesse also tells them to apply themselves, which may be a callback to Walt writing "apply yourself" to Jesse's failed chemistry test from back when he was still in high school. Meanwhile, we see another family barbecue at Hank and Marie's, as if that wasn't already obvious enough considering all the purple at the table. Marie follows Skylar into the kitchen where she's finally able to reluctantly apologize for the whole baby tiara situation. Marie seemed to hope that it would just go away, but Skylar confronts her over the fact that things will never be the same between the two of them like Marie wants them to be unless she confesses realizes what she did out loud and actually apologizes for it. Although this is a genuinely good scene between the two, as you may know, I have a bias towards disliking the whole Marie shoplifting side stories. It doesn't really go anywhere and was mainly created to elaborate on Marie's character by giving her something to do to cause internal conflict. It's still good internal conflict, especially in the moment, but in hindsight, it's widely regarded by fans as potentially the least liked story arc out of the whole show. Plus, this scene just feels like the creator shoehorned it into the episode in order to finally conclude this conflict between Marie and Skylar, but it's kind of fun to compare Marie and Skylar's conflict here to the creators wanting to move on from it as a whole. In a way, the creators just wanted the extended family dynamic to go back to normal just like Marie wants, but if the show were to just totally drop and forget about the tiara situation and have things return to normal while as if acting like nothing ever happened, it wouldn't feel right, just like Marie's failed attempt to deal with it. So in order for the show to finally move on from what they created and put the pieces back in their original positions, they need to have the resolution that Skylar so badly wanted. Anyways, even though it's probably my least favorite side story out of the entire show, aside from maybe Ted Beneke, they can still be really important as there's surprisingly a lot to say about them, which just goes to show how well Breaking Bad accomplishes being a successful character study. With that in mind, I'll be saving any further elaborations of this for a potential Marie/Skylar full story of Retrospective sometime in the undetermined future. Meanwhile, with just the boys still outside of the barbecue, Junior continues to hassle Hank about the shootout that he had with Tuco, which Hank is clearly reluctant to speak about. I love how multi-layered this situation is due to the many different angles between these three characters towards the shootout. Junior naively wants to learn more about it as he thinks it's cool, not understanding the serious ramifications of how it could have potentially affected Hank's mental health negatively. Hank, reluctant to express how he truly feels, just brushes off Junior asking questions. Then there's Walt, who was actually at the shootout and majorly a part of what put all the dominoes in place to fall that caused the situation. Of course, Hank has no idea of Walt's involvement, so he just has to uncomfortably stand there while Hank and Junior talk about it, similar to the scene a few episodes ago when Walt was getting released from the hospital. However, unlike the hospital scene, here Walt actually does say something to Hank as he asks a leading question by wondering where criminals like Tuco come from in regard to what makes them who they are. This is in response to Hank comparing Tuco to a cockroach, implying how drug dealers are just vermin, along with stating how you just stomp down on them instinctively as if they are beneath him instead of being equal human beings. Walt may have indirectly been offended by this, which is what caused him to speak up, as he doesn't like Hank implying that all criminals are the same. Since Walt is a criminal, he doesn't think of himself to be at all like Tuco, and may not like Hank putting all criminals in the same bracket. As we followed Walt's story up to this point, we've learned of his clear motives and aspirations to do any means necessary to provide for his family, which makes me think of Better Call Saul, in season 3 spoilers here, in regard to Chuck stating how Jimmy has a way of doing the worst things for reasons that seem almost noble. Now, it's interesting to consider the exact opposite life path that Walt has had compared to Tuco as a Salamanca, yet their completely separate paths still eventually led them to the same point and even intersected, to put it lightly. This leading question that Walt asks Hank is yet another example of Walt trying to project his criminal lifestyle into the conversation with Hank to learn his opinions on the matter, or potentially even change them to what Walt believes in regard to being a criminal himself. The first main example of this happening is when Walt and Hank shared a cigar in Walt's backyard while speaking of substances being legal or illegal, which coincidentally was during Skylar's baby shower when she first opened the tiara gift. So in a way, the barbecue at Hank's here in this episode is a direct continuation of both plot threads that we saw during Skylar's baby shower in the season 1 finale. Skylar and Marie talk about the tiara, and then there's Hank and Walt, with Walt trying to sway Hank's opinions on drugs and dealers. Next up, we get a montage of Skinny Pete, Badger, and Combo dealing on the streets set to the song Peanut Vendor by Alvin Red Tyler, which is a very funny song title to compare to the montage, as Jesse's friends are definitely vendors, but are selling something a lot worse than peanuts. However, they're selling in such small amounts at a time that their 13th baggies could be compared to peanuts. Now, continuing the one step forward but 2 steps back theme, although things seem to be going well at first, they ultimately go south fast, with Skinny Pete getting mugged at knife point by a couple of junkies for his drugs. Also, wow, I absolutely hate the cackling that comes out of the female junkie's mouth as she celebrates over leading Skinny into a trap. But even so, with the next episode in mind, I know better than to call her a skank.
No, don't!
So Walt meets out with Jesse in the desert once more to split their profits, where Walt notices that some is missing. Jesse informs Walt of bad news in regard to Skinny Pete being mugged, brushing it off as Breakage, which is where the name of the episode comes from. This is of course another Jesseism, kinda like Rickyisms and Trailer Park Boys, as Jesse's using the word breakage incorrectly, with the word that he's truly looking for being shrinkage. Of course you wouldn't know these terms, so it's just another comedic moment of Jesse misusing terms. Jesse explains it as the cost of business and compares it to having inventory damaged at a store, whereas although it's an expense, the store still gets a net profit due to the many other successful transactions that they have. Likewise, although Walt and Jesse are only getting $15K each instead of $16K, that's still $15,000 more than they previously had, so Jesse thinks they should just cut their losses and accept that they still made a net profit. However, if we know one thing about Walt, it's that he's a stickler for minute details like this, and holds a high bar in regard to what's acceptable and what's not. The character trait is, for example, why Walt only ever wanted to make the purest product possible back when he first started cooking with Jesse at the beginning of the show, as he holds what he does to the highest standard. Walt always has a way of grasping seemingly insignificant details and making the biggest deal out of them, and he does it in such a way where he constantly makes his opinions seem objectively right while belittling anyone who opposes them. So due to Walt's pride and his ego, he stubbornly oversteps by demanding that Jesse should get retribution for Skinny Pete being robbed. Walt defends this idea over the fact that if Jesse just lets Skinny being robbed go, word will get out that his crew is ripe for the picking, resulting in this happening again and again.
And it's open season on these clowns you've hired, huh? Once everyone knows that Jesse Pinkman, drug lord, can be robbed with impunity.
Walt doesn't want them to seem like some pushovers, and so he even brings up Tuco, comparing themselves to him, which calls back to earlier when Jesse stated how they could become their own Tuco.
We got to be Tuco.
You think Tuco had breakage? I guess it's true, he did. He broke bones. He broke the skull of anybody who tried to rip him off.
Walt acknowledges how people never messed with Tuco due to the violent consequences that would come as a result, and so he wants to set the same standards for themselves as well. As Walt gets home, he finally confronts Skylar over how she's been secretly smoking while pregnant. This conversation starts in the form of them using Skylar eating frozen paninis as a metaphor for her smoking. Apparently they stopped buying them due to it being bad for the baby, but Skylar downplays it by reluctantly stating how she gets cravings once in a while and that it's not a big deal. We continue to see them throw passive-aggressive remarks back and forth at each other in the form of wondering where Junior is, as Skylar simply states out, calling back to how she would leave the house all day without telling Walt where. Skylar knows that Junior's out with Lewis, but doesn't know exactly what they're doing. Although Skylar should be more adamant about knowing where their son is going when he goes out, she's right about it being equally Walt's responsibility as they're both his parents. This could be argued back and forth considering the fact that Walt was out while Junior left, meaning that since Skylar was the one home when he left, she should have been the one to ask where he was going. However, Walt is always out and seemingly always absent, so, you know, it's not an even distribution as far as parenting goes. Walt was only out due to meeting up with Jesse, so it's Walt's own fault that he was seemingly neglecting his family as he's never home when he should be to help look after Junior. So this is another scene where although Skylar is objectively right, just such a way of coming across as the nagging, passive-aggressive wife, causing casual audiences to take Walt's side in any argument that they have, even though Walt is truly the monster out of the two of them. As I said in a recent response to a tweet that compared Skylar from Breaking Bad to Kim from Better Call Saul, it seems like the creators purposely made Kim more likable as they potentially learned from their mistakes of making Skylar so unlikable even though she's usually in the right. Later that night, Hank wakes up in the middle of the night due to hearing what sounds like gunshots going off somewhere in his house. So due to a mix of his PTSD from the shootout with Tuco, along with his instincts as a DEA agent, he starts searching his house with a flashlight and a pistol, worried that there's an intruder. As it turns out, all of his homemade drinks are just popping due to him previously sealing them too tight earlier in the episode, once again showing how unhinged he truly is from Tuco, to the point that he can't even do his hobby correctly, which he was only doing to try and ignore his current life problems. Also, due to this whole situation, Hank almost accidentally shoots Marie due to her coming in through the other entrance to the garage. This false alarm could be compared to episode 201, when Walt searched his house afraid that Tuco did something to his family. After Walt's confrontation with Skylar about the cigarettes, he then goes to Jesse's late the same night to give him back his gun, telling him to handle the situation with the implication obviously being violence. Walt wants to be known as a crew that shouldn't be messed with, but in order to get that message across, he wants Jesse to take care of the Skinny Pete situation by enacting vengeance on the junkies who robbed him. Walt insisting that they get revenge slowly edges him one step closer to becoming a Tuco figure, as he's now okay with ordering violence upon another in order to defend his territory and create a reputation as someone you shouldn't mess with. The following morning, the episode ends as Hank throws Tuco's grill into the river, once again symbolizing how he doesn't want to be reminded of the shootout after he's clearly been negatively affected by it. Hank doesn't feel pride in killing Tuco like the appearance that he puts on would suggest, and he seemingly hates how that is what's expected of him. This episode gets a strong B tier and again feels pretty underrated. When it comes to season 2, fans always remember Grilled and 4 Days Out, but episodes like this seem to be forgotten or slept on. However, while going through episodes like Down or Breakage and analyzing each scene and how the characters react within them, there's many good character-driven moments that really do a good job going in depth on their separate perspectives of each situation. All this to say that season 2 gets more hate than it deserves, and as I said earlier, Breaking Bad is an amazing character study, and even though Better Call Saul takes that to the extreme, Breaking Bad is still a masterpiece in that regard too. Also, I almost wanted to put this episode in the A tier as well, since even some of the weaker episodes of the show are still incredibly strong in comparison to other TV shows as a whole. Kinda hilarious how I even have a D tier for my Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad retrospectives, considering I never put a single Better Call Saul episode in D tier, and I'm unsure if I ever will for Breaking Bad either. Season 2 Episode 6, Peekaboo. This episode is heavily focused on Jesse as he deals with the junkies that robbed Skinny Pete. So with that in mind, it's kind of fitting how the first scene now retroactively makes me think of El Camino every time I see it, due to the fact that I love the El Camino reference of Jesse in this cold open sparing the life of a beetle. Jesse is widely regarded as the innocence of the series, which gets slowly stripped away from him from episode to episode the further the show goes on. In this cold open, we see him curiously observing a beetle on the sidewalk to the point that he just lets it go instead of killing it, potentially symbolizing how Jesse's not a killer, nor does he want to be. After Jesse lets the beetle go, Skinny Pete walks up and purposely steps on it without a thought, clearly unaware of Jesse just sparing it, and Skinny Pete doing this is similar to the way that Hank compared killing Tuco to stomping on a cockroach in the last episode. Skinny Pete stepping on the beetle could also represent the innocent lost within Jesse, due to what's to come in regard to the climax of the episode involving Spooge having a close encounter with his precious ATM, with Spooge potentially being represented as the beetle itself, which I guess would make Skinny Pete the ATM, but enough beetle talk. Jesse's there on the corner of the street to meet up with Skinny Pete to get the address of the people who mugged him. Now if Skinny Pete squashing the beetle didn't get a laugh out of you, this lack of ability to spell even the simplest words might.
Hey man, I'm slinging mad volume and fat stacking Benjis, you know what I'm saying? I can't be all about, like, spelling and shit.
Hey.
Here we learn that Skinny Pete was actually on probation, as he uses this as an excuse to not confront the junkies himself, instead asking Jesse if he's up for the task, while trying to put on a tough guy act that he still would. Now, in order to hype himself up, Jesse smokes some crystal in his car before approaching the house. When he does, we get some funny moments from him, first including him practicing holding them at gunpoint.
Up. How you want to play this? Huh? You know, your call. Your funeral, Jack.
He gets so worked up doing it that he completely forgets that he's in broad daylight, that is until a male woman approaches the house. Jesse hides the gun behind his back, worried that she saw him with it, but in reality she just asks him to move as he's blocking the mailbox. They make some awkward small talk until she leaves, at which point Jesse realizes that he can't just stand outside in broad daylight waving a gun all day, go figure, so he instead breaks into the house and enters. Side note, I do really like this interaction between Jesse and the mail woman, comedy aside, as it acknowledges the fact that if criminals are doing something illegal in broad daylight, someone is bound to notice them. Usually shows or movies for some reason ignore this fact, which makes them seem kinda unrealistic, but here Breaking Bad actually acknowledges it, even though it's kind of a joke and Jesse just barely doesn't actually get caught. So as Jesse enters the house, he starts searching it while looking for the junkie couple, but all he finds is their kid, giving us a huge juxtaposition towards the entire situation and altercation that Jesse is about to cause. Jesse's high out of his mind and plans on holding two junkies at gunpoint, so having a kid thrown into the mix is a huge surprise, and is partly what makes this episode so intriguing to watch and memorable. As we were hinted at when Jesse was at an old friend's house, Jesse has a soft spot for kids, and that theme continues here with Spooge's kid. Due to Jesse being the tragic character who loses his innocence throughout the series, he seems to be good with kids and has a soft spot for them, potentially due to being able to relate to their innocence as well, showing how he is a caring person. So with no one else home but this seemingly random kid, Jesse sits there with him, waiting for the kid's parents so he can do what he went there for. Due to this, Jesse's high ends up wearing off by the time that they finally do arrive, defeating the whole purpose of smoking up in the first place. In the meantime, Jesse wonders why this kid is watching infomercials on a TV that's old for even 2008 standards, so he goes to change the channel, quickly realizing how there is only one channel, as Spooge most likely doesn't pay for cable. He then makes the kid some food while probably wondering when the last time he even ate was. To state the obvious, this kid seems extremely neglected, as he looks like he hasn't even had a bath or shower in months. Considering his living conditions and who he has as parents, he's probably been through some horrible things, which is most likely why he barely even speaks at all. Now, sometimes it can be difficult to get a good child actor, especially for a bit part in a TV show or if they have a lot of dialogue, so I think the creators choosing to write this kid to have as little dialogue as possible actually works in their favor in that regard, which must have been done on purpose to fit into the episode in such a way where it seems natural due to the kid's surroundings. Meanwhile, we see that although Marie apologized to Skylar in the last episode, Skylar's still ignoring her calls at least somewhat, implying how it'll most likely take time to heal the wound between them. Skylar does, however, pick up for the next phone call immediately after, as it's revealed to be Gretchen Schwartz. She's apparently calling the house due to not being able to reach Walt on his cell phone as it's been disconnected due to Tuco destroying it at the beginning of the season. It's interesting how Gretchen calling the house phone due to just now realizing that she can't contact Walt through his cell phone didn't set off any red flags for Skylar, as this implies that Gretchen hasn't spoken to Walt all season long, or at least since he was released from the hospital for his fugue state, when Walt had just told Skylar at the beginning of the last episode that he talked to Gretchen and Elliot about covering the hospital bills from his stay there. I suppose she can just chalk it up to Walt not having gone around to it yet since it was only a day or two ago, but Walt has been getting weekly payments for his treatment, so you'd assume how Skylar would think that Walt would have been in contact with them at some point within the last few months. Anyways, although Skylar has had recent problems with Walt in regard to trust, she currently has no reason to believe that Walt has been lying about Gretchen and Elliot paying his medical expenses, so instead of questioning Gretchen or noticing any red flags, she instead outpours her gratitude towards her. This obviously sets off a red flag for Gretchen herself, however, as the whole significance of this scene is that she's now realizing that Walt has been lying to his family about her paying for his treatments, when in reality she hasn't, as he denied her offer multiple times. So, Gretchen innocently asks to come visit Skylar in person as she secretly wants clarification about Walt's lie. Walt, of course, isn't home as this is his first day back working as a chemistry teacher after his fugue state, where he gets visited by Principal Carmen, who asks him how he's feeling after class. Fun fact, did you know that even the principal of Walt's school actually has more appearances in the show than Tuco? I haven't added up the total screen time or anything, but 5 episodes later, I still can't get over the fact of how little screen time Tuco actually had in the show, especially after doing my full story of Tuco retrospective recently, which you should totally check out. I'll have it linked at the end of the video. But I digress. As we can see in the scene with Principal Carmen, we're getting hints of Walt potentially being infatuated with her, while also getting unintentional mixed signals of her feeling the same towards him, when in reality, she's just innocently checking in on him as she is a genuinely good person that cares about him, but as a friend and fellow employee. Partly the reason why she may be so concerned for him is due to the fact that she probably knows how he was found naked in a supermarket, which we realize has been a rumor spreading around school due to Walt seeing a vandalized missing poster of him on his windshield when he goes to drive Junior and himself home. I'm unsure if Junior and his friend Lewis have told other students, or if the information of Walt's disappearance spread some other way. I don't know if, there were any news reports about it or anything, but regardless, his reputation has now been permanently damaged. Walt didn't seem to let it bother him at first, but this shows how his criminal life and excuses for it are bleeding into his regular life, adding on to the side effects of his fugue state alibi. But back to Jesse. After making the kid some food, Jesse tries playing Peekaboo with him, which is obviously what the episode's named after, but for a bigger reason than this scene initially leads on, as we'll circle back to this by the end of the episode with a much greater significance. Jesse then hears the junkies arriving home from quite a ways away due to their constant arguing and bickering, which again gives some insight on what their kid must be dealing with on a daily basis. Speaking of which, Jesse quickly rushes the kid to his room and tells him to stay put, as he wants to avoid the kid becoming involved in what's about to happen. So as the junkies enter their home, they don't even realize that their house has been broken into, probably due to how messy it is, until Jesse suddenly points a gun at their faces. Now, as another side note, as if the woman's cackling in the last episode wasn't bad enough, this is 10 times worse, as here she starts obnoxiously yelling as some sort of junky human self-alarm system.
Get up! Shut up! Shut up! Both
both of you!
Which hits the nail on the head in regard to being extremely annoying. Meanwhile, back to Walt as he drives Junior and himself home. It seems that the vandalized missing poster of himself has somewhat pinched a nerve, as he tells Junior a hypothetical of them kidnapping the culprits and dragging them out to the desert, which I just realized may actually be foreshadowing to episode 208. Although Walt is purposely coming across as joking about it to Junior, it's interesting to see Junior's reaction to it, playing along with it, not realizing that Walt is actually capable of such a thing, which gives the conversation a dark spin to it. As they arrive home, Walt notices Gretchen's vehicle in his driveway, giving himself a sudden panic moment as he worries that the jig is up. Viewers may think the same, as that's what the previous scene of Gretchen speaking to Skylar over the phone may have implied. However, as Walt enters the home, it's revealed that Gretchen is actually keeping Walt's secret, as she never told Skylar the truth about how she has nothing to do with paying for Walt's treatments. Now, though we miss whatever Skylar and Gretchen talked about while alone, we get a moment of Junior thanking Gretchen for supposedly providing for Walt's treatments, which is where Walt realizes that he hasn't been made, and that Gretchen is seemingly going along with this lie, even though she's pretty uncomfortable. So she leaves quickly, and even after Walt confronts her outside, she says nothing of significance to him, implying how she's not impressed with him, including her in his lies. We then cut back to Jesse interrogating the junkies about where his money and drugs are, but Spooge instantly tries diverting the conversation into a way out by coming up with the excuse that he might have a concussion from Jesse hitting him over the head when he got home, and that he needs to go to the hospital. Jesse clearly isn't playing any games, as he just hits Spooge in the head again, demanding that they shut up. Then, after getting them to empty their pockets, something that Tuco made him do when the roles were reversed, since the junkies didn't cough up what they stole, they literally pulled drugs out of their asses, as they both apparently had hooped a baggie each. As if that wasn't gross enough, Jesse even picks them up, granted with his sleeve, but still not worth it all. Can't believe he did that even to check how much was there. I mean, you can eyeball it, right? So they clearly didn't do all the drugs that they stole like they claim, as they both would have OD'd with that amount. Spooge blames the woman for having lost it, which is pretty ridiculous. It's a lot of money and drugs, but to be honest, I wouldn't put it past them, as that just adds to their whole junkie persona. It is believable. So Jesse continues to threaten them, and their kid comes out of his room, where his mother shows him more love than she probably has his whole life. It's absolutely disgusting how she clearly neglects her child, but then pretends to care about him in order to use him as a shield from Jesse, actually putting him in harm's way. A normal caring mother would have told their kid to run away to safety, go back to their room, leave the house, but she does the exact opposite in this clear manipulation tactic to try and save herself by painting herself as a loving mother with a kid. Plus, just the way that she does this while giving the look that she gives Jesse it just infuriates me. Spooge then admits that they have all the money that they owe him, plus interest, but there's a catch. The money is stored inside an ATM that they stole, but they need Jesse's help cracking it open, as they're unable to figure out how to do so themselves. Spooge preaches how stealing the ATM was a victimless crime, but as he explains the theft, we see a cutaway revealing how they actually murdered a witness at the store that they took it from. Where do I even begin with this? First off, apparently the guy that Spooge killed for the ATM is the same guy that towed the RV out of the ditch for Walt and Jesse at the beginning of episode 102. And I can't tell if Spooge is so delusioned that he thinks that stealing the ATM and murdering the civilian in order to do so are two separate crimes or unrelated, or if he truly knows what he did, but he's just saying anything he can to get Jesse to not be mad at him and help him. Regardless, this goes to show his lack of remorse for his actions, along with general disregard to any harm that he causes others, which may have been set up for the audience to not feel so bad for him when the inevitable happens later in this episode with the ATM. Spooge also says FIDC instead of FDIC, and also look at what his freaking shirt says. I guess he was the true skank after all. So they transport the ATM back inside, where Jesse becomes increasingly mad at Spooge for not being able to open it, with his woman even mocking him for stealing multiple in the past, but never being able to open any of them. As Spooge and his woman start bickering again, Jesse breaks it up, and I love the detail of Spooge seemingly winding up a swing with his sledgehammer to hit Jesse from behind, but he's never able to do so, as Jesse doesn't keep his back turned to him for long enough. Jesse then wonders where their kid is, to which the woman responds, "What are you asking me for?" Again, proving how she doesn't give a crap about her kid, to the point that she's so oblivious to the fact that, she's the kid's mother, she should know where her son is. How's their kid not sent to a foster home ages ago? Jesse finds the kid back in his room and starts shaking his head in regard to what he must have to put up with. This episode is genuinely disturbing and dark for that very reason, which makes me incredibly sad to think about how for a lot of kids, this probably is a reality. So Jesse returns to the mother to ream her out for not taking care of the kid, which is a good thing to see. I mean, it was finally someone's said it, but instead of smartening up or defending herself, she instead tries twisting Jesse's words to possibly seduce him in order to potentially get herself out of the situation. I'm honestly at a loss for words at this point, but I'll still throw some at the wall. Disgusting, disgraceful, trashy, all the above, take your pick. At this moment, Jesse's had enough, and I don't blame him, so he resorts to trying to break open the ATM by brute force himself. Meanwhile, Walt meets Gretchen at a restaurant to talk, where she admits how she hasn't yet decided whether she's gonna tell Elliot about how Walt has included them in his lies. Although Walt tries to sincerely apologize, he still doesn't tell her why he lied to his family about where his medical bills are getting paid from. This implies to me that Walt isn't sorry for including her in his lies whatsoever, and he only apologized in the proper way that he thinks that he should in order to get her off his back and convince her to keep this secret from Elliot and his family. Walt then makes this clear, as he even states that he doesn't owe her an explanation but only an apology, which he's already done, and then proceeds to do so 2 more times while counting them each time, as if that makes it any better.
I don't owe you an explanation. I owe you an apology, and I have apologized. I am very sorry, Gretchen. There. I've apologized twice now. I'm humbly sorry. 3 times.
As it's so insincere, and it's a clear sign of someone not actually being sorry, but instead just telling someone what they think they want to hear in order to get out of the situation. As Gretchen confronts Walt on why he did it, he pretty much tells her it's none of her business, as he states that he's not obligated to tell her. Gretchen argued that she unknowingly became involved with Walt's lies when he used her in them, and that she does deserve an answer. I can only imagine how bizarre this must be for Gretchen, to offer to pay for Walt's treatment multiple times, have her offer denied while Walt lies about how his insurance covers it, find out that Walt's been secretly paying for his treatment somehow while lying to his family about how she is, and then have Walt deny giving her an explanation for any of it, to the point that he essentially tells her to F off.
Yeah. That's pretty much the size of it.
Gretchen has treated Walt way better than he deserves, and even continues to do so after finding out about including her in his lies, as she states how her offer to pay for his treatment still stands. Gretchen is clearly realizing that the Walt that she knew was dead, as she wonders what could have happened to him. She says how this isn't him, and this isn't the way that she remembers him, but in reality, this is truly Walt. Walt's evil side has laid dormant within himself his whole life, and it's just now starting to come out after his cancer diagnosis, with this being the first time that Gretchen has ever seen it. She even tried bringing up the past, wondering if that's what this is all about, but he refuses to admit anything, instead accusing her of his slanted opinion that's fueled his resentment towards her for years. He then seemingly turns into his Heisenberg persona as he lets out his rage towards her, showing how his criminal persona and regular life persona are now bleeding together. Walt stares at her with a cold, dead expression that she's never seen on his face before, and gives her a brutal F you, which understandably causes her to leave. As I stated during my Breaking Bad Season 1 tier list retrospective, I do plan on eventually getting around to making a full story retrospective of Gretchen and Elliot themselves, where I will be getting into their somewhat vague past with Walt, but needless to say, I am 100% on Gretchen's side of this situation, and I wholeheartedly agree with her when she says to Walt,
I don't even know what to say to you. I don't even know where to begin.
As Walt is absolutely appalling in this scene. Walt can't stand being told the honest truth of the situation, and he especially hates getting caught in his lies to the point that he's being pushed to reveal the truth without having another excuse to pull out of his ass. Plus, Gretchen stating how she feels sorry for Walt may have also offended him, as he takes it as pity and doesn't want it, at least that's how he sees it. So those 2 points on top of combining his lifelong resentment towards her causes Walt to snap in this way that's just absolutely disgusting. Gretchen is just about the nicest person that Walt has ever met, and he still has the audacity to treat her this way. I guess she dodged a bullet, so to speak. Kinda wild that I almost feel equal disgust towards Walt in this moment as I have felt towards Spooge and his junkie woman all episode long. Speaking of which, returning to Jesse's situation, Jesse and Spooge have seemingly tired themselves out after swinging at the ATM with a sledgehammer for so long. The kid comes into the room again, where Jesse wonders if he's hungry. He implies that he wants to play Peekaboo again, as Jesse has most likely given him more attention in one day, or really a few hours, than his parents have in years. But the mother uses this moment to her advantage to knock Jesse out, clearly indifferent about committing such violence in front of her own kid or using him as a distraction, contrasting how Jesse originally wanted to shield shielded the kid from the violence earlier. We then cut to Jesse waking up as the woman steals his gun and yells at Spooge to wake up now that she's gotten the upper hand on him. As Jesse passes out again, we then cut to Walt back home, where Skylar tells him that Gretchen informed her that she's cutting them off and no longer going to provide for Walt's treatments. After Skylar told Walt that Gretchen called and that they need to talk about it, he assumed that he totally screwed things up and that Gretchen told Skylar the truth, but to Walt's surprise, and to mine, she didn't. This implies to Walt that even after the horrible way he treated her, while completely failing to convince her to keep his secret, she still cares about him enough to not spill the beans about the truth to Skylar and cause any more drama. However, her stating that she's cutting them off is her way of absolving herself from being included in his lies any longer. So in a way, by telling Skylar that she's cutting them off, she's in turn cutting herself off from the current situation as a whole. Walt uses this to his advantage and takes the out, by using it to spin his own excuse about how Gretchen and Elliot won't pay for his treatments any longer. He continues to lie about them, telling Skylar that they're cutting them off because they're secretly going broke. This shows how Walt hasn't learned his lesson whatsoever, as he didn't have to face any consequences, so he instead decides to dig himself deeper into this web of lies in order to talk himself out of it. Skylar's initially suspicious of, well, Walt and Gretchen's suspicious behavior after Walt came home while Gretchen was visiting her, but after Walt explains away how they're broke, she mostly believes him. This explains Gretchen's odd behavior, especially after Skylar showed such gratitude, as Skylar now believes that they were most likely already planning to cut them off. However, she starts instantly chipping away holes in Walt's story in regard to how Gretchen could have just told her that herself, and Walt has the audacity to imply that Gretchen's pride got in the way when in reality, we all know that Walt's the one with the huge pride and ego problem. How ironic. Then, after Skylar is seemingly convinced, she brings up how Gretchen still drives a Bentley, but Walt simply chalks it up to appearances, as Skylar already almost had him check and mate. This whole scene shows that regardless of Skylar's current feud against Walt in regard to all the lies and conflict, she still cares deeply about him, as we see this moment of her truly worried about how they're gonna handle things together in regard to Walt's treatments from now on. However, as she realizes the cracks in Walt's explanation, she's right back to suspecting that he's lying to her. Clearly, the strength of Walt's excuses rely on how much time he has to create them. When it comes to the fugue state alibi or visiting his mother as an excuse a few episodes from now, whenever Walt has time to premeditate them, they're usually almost bulletproof. However, when he's put on the spot, he's still able to come up with somewhat believable excuses, even though they prove to be less solid than if he had time to think about them at first, as you would expect. And regardless, it seems that eventually he'll always be caught in his lies, so it's just a matter of how long he can prevent that from happening. So Jesse wakes up on the floor once more and overhears Tweedledee and Tweedledum talking about how instead of doing something with Jesse, they just let him lie there while they did some H and then went right back to trying to crack open the safe. Kind of incredibly stupid, but then again, why am I not surprised? Jesse uses the fact that they don't know he's awake to his advantage to try and grab a weapon, but he's unable to move without them noticing. So as he lies there pretending to still be asleep, he overhears them bickering once more as Spooge calls her a skank one too many times, whether due to the H running through her veins or if she's just had enough of the domestic abuse or both. She's had enough clearly and literally murders Spooge by tipping the ATM machine onto his head, killing him.
No skank.
No, don't! No!
Jesse tries to stop it, but it's too late. Speaking of her being on H, she doesn't even seem to acknowledge what she did or care, as she just coldly goes to grab the crystal out of Spooge's pocket that he had previously denied her, and then she goes on the couch to smoke it. I suppose the death by ATM could be seen as poetic justice of sorts, since Spooge murdered someone for the ATM in the first place. Jesse does what any rational person would do and starts wiping his fingerprints off of anything he may have touched, as he realizes that he's standing in an active crime scene. As he wipes the ATM down, it suddenly pops open, revealing all the money inside. Now, as a side note, I guess this is unrealistic because apparently ATMs have like a die pack system in them, so if they get broken into or stolen, the money gets sprayed so it becomes unusable, but I digress. So Jesse pockets as much of the cash that he can and continues wiping off his fingerprints from anywhere else that he can think of, such as the kitchen where he made the kid food, and then he goes to leave. However, right before he does so, he thinks about the kid and decides to enact one more moment of kindness towards him by shielding him from his dad's death. In order to do so, he goes to the kid in his room and convinces him to play Peekaboo one more time. This time in order to trick the kid to keep his eyes closed, so when Jesse carries him outside, he won't see his dead father on the ground under the ATM. This is why this episode is truly named Peekaboo, with the rule of thirds coming into play here, as this is the third time that the Peekaboo game is brought up between Jesse and the kid, which makes it work so well, especially since Jesse is able to convince the kid to keep his eyes covered due to the kid previously wanting to play Peekaboo again for the second time that it was brought up right before Jesse was knocked out. So Jesse brings the kid outside, gives him a blanket, calls 911 so the cops will show up, and then goes to leave, but doubles back, wanting to still tell the kid one final farewell, and hopefully that he can have a good rest of his life.
You have a good rest of your life, kid.
This makes the ending just that much more moving and emotional, since by averting the kid's eyes from Spooge's gruesome death, he essentially just potentially saved the kid from having an even worse amount of trauma than he probably already does. Also, apparently it's considered unrealistic for cops to arrive to a 911 call when nothing is actually said, but maybe they were already watching this house, so when they saw the address, they just came instantly. This episode gets an S tier. It was absolutely jaw-dropping when I first saw it, and it still holds up perfectly even after countless rewatches. I always get excited when this episode pops up in a binge watch, but I also dread watching it at the same time. The Jesse story this episode was brilliantly crafted, as it takes a deeper look into a soft spot for innocence, as I've said at the beginning of the episode breakdown. Also, I really do like how they chose to have the whole Gretchen finding out about Walt's lies be the side story for the episode too. They clearly needed to show Walt doing something on his own while Jesse handled Spooge and his woman, since Walt and Jesse don't actually meet up this episode, and the creators must have known that Gretchen and or Elliot would have found out about Walt's lies eventually, so it was a perfect excuse for them to conclude that plot thread as the B-plot. Also, I love the twist of how you think Gretchen's gonna tell Skylar the truth multiple times throughout the episode, if not when they first meet in person, then after Walt tells her F you, but in both cases she doesn't, which just makes the situation that much more tragic on its own due to her reasons why. So here's my full rankings for every episode of Breaking Bad up to episode 206, which is about halfway through season 2, which consists of 13 episodes. Now, depending on if you're watching this video attentively or letting it play as background noise in another tab, you may or may not have noticed that although we're nearing the end of the video, I've only gone through 6 out of 13 episodes of the season. You can probably see where I'm headed with this, but let me explain myself regardless. I'm actually writing this part of the script after finishing the entire script for all 13 episodes, but looking at the word count, along with how long it's taken me to record my commentary for just the first 6 episodes, I've come to the realization that I'll sadly have to split my season 2 retrospective into 2 parts, just like I did with my Better Call Saul season 6 retrospective. I originally thought I'd only have to potentially break up the future Breaking Bad season 5 retrospective in half due to the final season having 16 episodes, but apparently 13 is still far too much. Granted, season 6 of Better Call Saul had 13 episodes as well, but with that being the final season and all, I figured I just had a lot to talk about as it was the series finale. However, as it turns out, I have a lot to say about Breaking Bad as well, even just for season 2. This is not only due to the episode count for the season being 13 instead of 10, but also, I haven't yet covered Breaking Bad extensively on the channel like I have for Better Call Saul. Since I covered Better Call Saul since season 3 started airing, I've essentially made hundreds of videos talking up and down about every possible character and plot thread. However, since this is my first time truly breaking down Breaking Bad in depth on the channel, there's a lot I have to say about the show that I never have in a video before. So with that said, I'm assuming that not only will my Breaking Bad Season 2 tier list be split into 2 parts, but I also assume that my Seasons 3 to 5 retrospectives will be as well. Now, I know that my Season 2 tier list has taken longer than expected to come out, but that's partly due to the fact that I scripted out all 13 episodes before I just now decided to split it in half. I even created a poll as a community post on my channel asking you all if I should split the Season 2 tier list retrospective in half due to the extreme length, and at the time of recording this, about 70% of you who voted seem to agree that making it into 2 parts is the right move for multiple reasons. Now, don't get too disappointed because due to the fact that I already have episodes 207 and 213 scripted out, as I've said multiple times now, I'll be able to produce and upload part 2 of this Season 2 retrospective a lot quicker than it took to release part 1. For those watching the video down the road, I suppose a lot of this doesn't apply apply to you anymore by the time I have all my future tier lists completed, but I felt like it was still worth explaining exactly why I'm splitting the Season 2 tier list, along with probably future seasons, in half. So I will be giving my original final thoughts about Breaking Bad Season 2 at the end of Part 2, but for now I will say that Season 2 is a lot stronger than I remember, and I think it gets more flack than it deserves. Although each season of the show gets better the further it goes, Seasons 1 and 2 are still absolutely brilliant and deserve more recognition. I'm a huge fan of the character study aspect of watching these characters evolve or devolve within the Breaking Bad universe, and there's a lot here that's worth talking about, as you can tell by the length of the video only 6 episodes in. So in the meantime, if you require more Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul content to pass the time until Part 2 is uploaded, I recommend checking out my full story of Tuco retrospective that I released not too long ago, as that was an extremely fun video to create. Even if you're viewing this video in the distant future, feel free to also check out my full story of retrospective playlist, where I plan to create a full retrospective on pretty much every single character in the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul universe. I currently have one for Mike, one for Nacho, and now one for Tuco, and I have a lot planned in the future for that series, so look out for that too. Anyways, I'd appreciate a like on the video if you've enjoyed anything I've said today, subscribe for more Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul retrospectives in the near future, but most importantly, I thank you all so much for watching, especially to the end of the video, and until next time, I'll talk to you all later. Peace out!